Okay, we are recording. Can I share what I've been listening to all morning with you, Sean?
Well, let me guess. Little Feet.
This is really good stuff, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't know who Little Feat is because I
Yeah.
like classic rock and like that's some like nice kind of CCR kind of Steely Dan. I don't know how you would describe that kind of rock.
They are probably more for, I guess, Gen Z and millennial listeners of music. It'd be more like, no, let me think about this for a second. Probably Dave Matthews type with just a little more raucous than Dave Matthews, I would say. Yeah, more of a late '70s, early '80s culture. Dave Matthews when things were a little wild. So yeah,
Gotcha. I
and
think you're
the musicianship is incredible, and their live shows were quite amazing. I think. And
It's just
so
kind of
yeah,
very buoyant, but also a little raw. And
right,
um,
right,
I
yeah.
I I asked you for a few kind of cultural influences over email before we did this, and you sent me a couple books like *Sapiens*, another one called *Decisive*, *A Short Walk in the Hindu Kush*, and then *Little Feat* and *Ry Cooter*. And I fed these into AI. I didn't put your name in or anything. This was completely anonymous. And I said, could you give me a psychological profile on this guy? Can I give you its results based on your cultural favorites?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Um, it says psychologically, this is someone who holds romantic impulses in tensions with realism, is socially observant, morally serious, but allergic to preachiness, enjoys solitude and reflection, yet believes life is fundamentally relational, is skeptical of grandiosity. I don't know about that about you, Sean, but is still drawn to big questions. At root, this is a person oriented towards meaning through lived texture. They are trying quietly but persistently to understand how a human life ought to be lived, not perfectly, not heroically, but well enough with attention, humility, and care. I'd say that's pretty good based on what I know about you, which isn't much, but I read your book, and that's kind of the attitude I picked up. How does that resonate with you?
Send that to me. That's amazingly accurate. Actually, I like that better than I could have said it myself. So yeah, I'm going to send it to my kids and see what they think. That's how they're
That was
tagged.
actually, it boiled it down. ChatGPT offered quite a bit more
Yeah,
analysis.
that's
Did,
cool. That's
what did
nice.
you lit? I was up in Montana recently. I walked across and kayaked American Prairie. What do you listen to? Because I know you have to go on these long 4 hour long drives. Are you listening to podcasts? Are you listening to Little Feet? What are you doing on those long drives?
It's a good question. It's maybe this will seem like a strange answer, but the way my brain operates is I'm always looking for to be vetting ideas with other people to see if two or more of us can try to each of us has a piece of the idea that is attractive. We can't quite put the whole together. When I have been on the reserve, it often is I'm walking with people or sitting outside around the fire. We're taking long drives from one piece of property to another out there. And we're discussing these ideas and it begins to gel. And then when I leave and I drive and I have quite a long, 4 or 5 hour drive by myself coming back, I have all kinds of podcasts I listen to. I like lots of different kinds of music. And I go, okay, so after I think this thing through, that we were talking about for the last 4 or 5 days with all my colleagues, I'll put on something so I don't get bored. And I can't tell you how many times I've arrived home 5 hours later and I never turned anything on.
Oh,
It is digesting and synthesizing what everybody else said and trying it's like moving a pieces of puzzle around on a table, and I've got absolute quiet. There's no traffic, absolutely no traffic, except maybe a car every 8 or 9 minutes or something comes by coming towards me, because it's beautiful, beautiful country, huge skies, might sometimes it's stars, sometimes it's depending on the night or day, and I'm trapped and nobody can get to me because it's really dead cell service, most of the time where I'm going through. It's quiet. So that's mostly what I'm doing is being quiet and trying to take all these really great pieces of conversation to move to a new idea that'll get us to the next place in the project. That's what most often happen.
You make it sound very pleasureful. So you don't it doesn't sound like you resent having to get in that truck and being like, "Oh man, it's another 4-hour haul."
No, I've done it. I don't do it so much anymore. I'm up there, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 times a year now, which is quite light compared to when I was, 17, 18 years when I was in my role there. I would be more like once a month, um, or more, oftentimes, and be up there for 4, 5, 6 days at a time. So I've done this well over 100 times in 18 years, right? I never get tired of that drive. I just don't. I'm not just looking at my watch and I wish I was home, et cetera, et cetera. It depends how harrowing the drive is. Sometimes it's black ice, which means you can't see it. Same color as the road, slick, crosswinds and things like that. I'd rather be home and be safe for sure. But most of the
Mm.
time, just go, this is a pretty amazing drive. Yeah, it's beautiful.
My nephew Tristan and I, we just had some amazing drives because we had to do some food drop offs on our path. So we dropped off some food at Enrico and then in Zortman and Judith Landing. So we got to see the whole thing, and like every
Yeah.
mile was just beautiful, especially when you see those breaks kind of at the western end of the
Hmm.
refuge. It's just unreal. It's one of the grandest views you probably get in all of America.
Yeah, absolutely.
I should probably introduce you now that we're 6 minutes into the podcast. Sean Gerrity is the co-founder and former CEO of American Prairie. And if I get any of this wrong, just let me know. Which is a giant wildlife refuge in the making in north central Montana, which I hiked and kayaked this past August. If I haven't already said that, he is the host of the Answers Are Out There podcast, in which he interviews leaders who've taken on bold conservation projects. And he's the author of Wild on Purpose, the American Prairie Story, and the Art of Thinking Bigger. I've been listening to your podcast this past week, which I really love because you're bringing in on these people who have all these innovative ideas. And I don't know what podcasting is like for you, but I love it just to have the conversations. Forget about like
Mhm.
building my brand or selling anything or anything like that. It's like it's having conversations that I wouldn't normally have. What is it like for you?
Exactly that. I don't think I have a brand. No one's offered to pay me for my brand, that's for sure.
No one's
So
paying me
it's
much for this either.
it's um what it does for me in these times when I'm with other people and they're fretting about the state of the world, just name whatever topic it is, food systems or politics or the environment or whatever. There's a lot to be concerned about. And at least here, we're sitting in two very different places. I'm in the lower 48 in the US, and our news is designed to try to get you upset. So you'll keep going back the next day and say, what happened yesterday that was even worse than yesterday, kind of thing. Yeah. Or tomorrow kind of thing. It's like watching a car wreck or something. You slow down to observe the car accident. And our news is bent heavily towards the negative. I'm talking about the US now. And it doesn't really matter what outlet you're looking at, whether it's which way it leans or anything like that. So in this job, though, um, I was able to talk with a lot of people around the world, mostly to try to get ideas from them where they're ahead of us in the world of rewilding, et cetera. And what parts of those ideas, if not the entire idea, could we port over into our work and make our work progress more intelligently, smoother, easier, faster, et cetera. And in talking to those folks, inadvertently, I found out about a lot of projects all over the world that are very exciting and feed one's optimism. And this was while I was at American Prairie. I wasn't recording it. I wasn't having a podcast or anything like that. Then I thought, when I finally had time after formally retiring from my role at American Prairie, at the time still being on the board and all that, and this podcasting stuff was taking off, prior to the pandemic, actually. I thought this could be maybe I know how to get to people. I know how to find these projects because we made it a point to find these projects to try to learn about. things to make our project better. I know how to get to them, triangulate through friends in Europe or Africa or wherever and land on these amazing places, these projects get introduced to people. Why don't I build a podcast and bring that to the rest of the world so they can have some reprieve from all of the bad news, at least in America? I mean, I read The Guardian and Singapore Straits Times and other things too, but there's nothing quite like American news to get you upset. So can I maybe be somewhat of a reprieve from that, maybe a balm in a world where this fire hose of news can be disturbing, and you can listen to this and catch a break and say, you know what, there are people out there I've never heard of. That's the most important thing for me is you've probably never heard of any of those folks. I bet as you looked at all the folks I interviewed, most of them weren't familiar to you. And the more you hear about them, you just go, what a fantastic person this person is that Gerrity's talking to. And what an amazing project. Who would have thought that up? And they're succeeding. So I want people to end the podcast and to come back if they listen to it while they're walking their dog or whatever, and they go, that was a bright spot in my day. That bit of news. I now know about that 4,500 square mile new marine protected area off the coast of California run by indigenous people and the woman who's the head of the tribe, the Chumash tribe was doing it. And I live in the United States. I've never heard of that project, so they're brightened. Their attitude is brightened up by having listened to these stories. That's the whole point for me. And it's fun. It's just fun when I run into people where someone says, hey, I just listened to that thing about Maine lobster fishermen starting to grow kelp off the coast of Maine or whatever it might be. It's they go, that was so cool. I've never heard of that particular project. So it's a blast to bring that to people.
I feel like everybody should have a podcast. Like everybody should have a therapist. Like it'll just do you some good. And I hadn't heard of most of those
Mm,
folks and the projects they were working on. And some of them are huge. Like that Native American woman you had on. That was like a
yeah,
5,000 plus square mile
it's
refuge
big.
off the coast of what, California? It was just like,
Yep.
wow, that's it's enormous.
Biggest new marine protected area in the United States, and most people in the US have never heard of that project. A lot of people haven't heard about the other native, indigenous woman I talked to, from the Yurok tribe, and the largest dam removal project in the world, the Klamath River, taking down 4 dams and, going over 200 miles of river run free again, and the salmon, they thought maybe it'd take them 20 years to find their way back up to the headwaters. It took them about 4 months. That's a lot of people have never heard of the Klamath Dam Removal Project. It involved Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett and the governor of California, and led by 6 different tribes did it. It's really cool. So,
It's
gotta get those
interesting.
stories out there.
It's interesting for me to hear you say, you're learning from other organizations,
Mhm.
you're picking up tips from them, because in many ways, American Prairie has probably learned a lot and has a lot of wisdom to offer other conservation projects. And I don't know where you rank American Prairie on the list of kind of grand conservation projects, but from what I know, I mean, it deserves a spot near the kind of the tippy top of that.
Well, I think it was 25 years ago when we started it, yeah, the idea in our head was certainly a big idea, and a lot of people said, "Well, Don Quixote had big ideas too, and yours may be about as important as that, tilting at windmills." But after it started gaining traction and it looked like we would be, heading in the direction of eventual success, it was a big idea. But these days, which I feel very good about, rewilding has taken off in the last 10 years and it's hard to keep up with all the cool projects. Just yesterday, I was on the phone with a guy named Mark Day with Alton Dial. Not pronouncing that, sorry, Mark, correct, but they're building this thing 3 times the size of American Prairie on the grasslands of Kazakhstan.
Wow.
Amazing project, absolutely amazing project. And Alistar Scott, who runs the Global Rewilding Alliance. And I started going through some of their members in there just yesterday. A whole bunch of folks I'd never heard of or want to talk to. So it's hard to keep up these days with the explosion, maybe hyperbole, but rapid expansion of rewilding projects. And I travel a lot. I've been to many, many different countries. And you go, and all of a sudden you're there just a little while. I was in Thailand for 5 weeks with my wife, and we're moving about slowly, staying on the ground, moving place to place, up and down the Malaysian peninsula. While I was there, I always try to read local papers and stuff, and stumbled across Thailand's the only Southeast Asian nation where the tiger population is increasing. And I started reading about how in the world are they doing that? Because that's not easy in a crowded place like Thailand. Off there to the west, sure enough, next to Myanmar, they did it exactly right with this incredibly intelligent collaboration between government officials, NGOs, small local NGOs, et cetera, and putting together small, as you know, small protected areas and hooking them up with really intelligently laid out corridors. And it just keeps linking and linking and linking, and their tiger populations are growing. Most people think tiger populations are crashing. Not so. Even India is beginning to export tigers, and Sumatran tigers are on the upswing. But people don't know this because some places you have to just go and be there for a while to stumble across these stories.
People don't know this, and we're kind of blind and deaf to a lot of the wonderful positive developments happening in the world, American Prairie being one of them. And I wanted to touch on just kind of the knownness of American Prairie and how you kind of perceive that whole thing. Because when I told all my friends I'm going to go on an expedition across American Prairie, they're like, "Where is that? What is that?" Nobody. I told a guest on this podcast who's a chair of an environmental studies program, and he had no idea
Mhm.
where it was. But yet, you've raised many millions of dollars for this place. You've given big talks to kind of big stuff. So there's kind of a weird kind of paradox there where it's kind of really well known in some circles, but it's not a household name to most Americans, and certainly not internationally. How do you think about that? And do you want American Prairie to be a household name, or is it kind of nice to be under the radar a little bit?
Well, I think the reason I've thought about this a lot because as a leader of an organization, particularly when you're trying to fundraise, it's a rough start when you go fly somewhere to talk to somebody and they say, "I've never heard of it. Can you start from scratch?" That burns up the first half hour of your lunch,
Mm.
trying to bring them up to speed. So it's frustrating. And how can you not have heard of this? How fast we're moving. And yeah, now hundreds of millions of dollars been raised for it. It's surprising. You shouldn't feel bad about it. Sitting in the UK, but I could go downtown in Bozeman, Montana with a clipboard and stand on the street. It's a little bit cold today, but on a warm day, when there's a lot of people walking around, I could just ask them, "Hey, I'll give you a hat, a free hat, if you just answer my question. Have you heard about American Prairie?" I bet more than 50% of the people not, and they live in
Wow.
Bozeman, Montana.
Even in Montana. Okay.
No, I could go down somewhere where I don't my person who cuts my hair now, but if I just walked into a random place to get a haircut, I'll bet the person I sit down with, they go, they start up a conversation. "What did you do?" I said, "I'm retired." "What'd you do before that?" I'll talk about American Prairie. Never heard of it. Yeah. So here's my thinking on that, Ken. When I was born, I'm a lot older than you, obviously. You can see. Uh, and growing up through the 60s, there was less than 4 billion people in the world. That's one thing. And there was exactly 3 news channels: CBS, NBC, and ABC. That's it. That's the only place you can get your news except your local newspaper. All right. Now, look at where news comes from and the amount of information you're expected to keep up on. I
Mhm.
mean, I just mentioned Myanmar. Do you know what's going on in Myanmar? That can take up your whole day to learn about what's going on in Myanmar. A lot of it's horrendous. What's going on in Sudan and Yemen, in Somaliland, which has actually got some rewilding stuff starting up now north of Somalia, the country. What's happening in Ukraine and all kinds of things, right? Depending on the topic you're interested in. But the level of noise out there and what you're expected to keep up on is just extremely crowded. Now we're 8.5 billion people. There's a lot going on, and all the vehicles that news has to travel on to land in your lap each day, it's overwhelming. It's really overwhelming. I don't think our brains are built for this kind of information flow and the societal expectation that you should keep up on what's going on. At the same time, just trying to run your life. So I think I don't get offended anymore. I just realize, wow, it's noisy out there. And trying to cut through the noise is an art, and to be recognized and known by the right kinds of people who can, for us, for American Prairie, I'm not running it anymore and I haven't for many years, getting people to decide from a philanthropic standpoint to put funding into this as opposed to the 100 other things they've been asked to put funding into. to come up on the top 3 of their list, you know? Um, you have to be very thoughtful about how you spend your time because time is finite, in addition to just trying to build the project, right? But keeping it going financially means getting to the right people and making sure they hear the right message and that it's not only is it believable, but you can back it up. You can fly them out there a year from now and say, look what we did with your money over and over and over again. And they're blown away with what you did and
Hmm.
they want to give you more, you know? So yeah, it'd be nice if more people knew about it, not to become famous or anything like that, but because I'd like more people to understand it. And the reason I wrote the book, maybe I'm jumping the gun on some of the questions you have, but I would like it to be the project itself, an inspiration to some of these younger generations. Forget baby boomers, even Gen X. They're Gen Xers are kind of in the late 40s, early 50s now, but the millennials and particularly Gen Z, I think, who are growing up with climate anxiety that often morphs into climate nihilism. And yes, I for young people, I'd like people to understand what happened with American Prairie because we started from scratch. Nobody was wealthy. It needed because of the model a huge amount of money, and none of us ever fundraised before. And the short story is, we figured it out. It was really hard. We made tons of mistakes. Still painful to me to think about the mistakes and how much time we wasted trying to do running down false trails and how it could have gone faster if we'd been a little bit wiser in execution in some of those parts. But in general, most days things went well and it moved forward. And a small team of regular people, not particularly well connected, non wealthy people, figured it out. And now it's one of the fastest moving conservation projects in an extremely contentious country where everyone's got an opinion. And a lot of it is why you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, why you should be stopped,
Yeah.
why it's not a good thing. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be in nature conservation or whatever else. It's amazing Americans are getting so good at saying that should be stopped because of this. We shouldn't do that because of this. And we had plenty of it. So I'd like younger generations, I'd like it to be known better, going back to your original point, not for fame and recognition and pats on the back for us who had a part of moving it along for a period of time, but so generations can start to feel a sense of optimism. Hope we can talk more about that today. It's a really important, I think, for young folks to feel like you can make a difference, you can exercise personal agency, and if you get to know your own values, your own sense of purpose, and understand how to set forth a vision for where you want to be in the coming years, and then start to apply that to something that matches your interests. Let's not raise the bar too high and say absolute passion, but interests, you can do some big, super cool things in this world today. I'm kind of jealous because I'm not going to be around that much longer, obviously. And to have the tools and the resources and the access to information, the ability to call other people and get their help and advice, never in human history has it been so rich from that standpoint. And it wasn't like that 25 years ago, I can tell you. There was not a lot of people to talk to about rewilding because it was just not a thing. So this is the best time ever to start something that means something to you. Unfortunately, the way the news is coming at you in such negative ways, this also is the one of the worst times to try to maintain optimism and not get depressed by what's going on.
Hmm.
So I think I like the story of American Prairie, and that's why I wrote the book, is shake that off. Don't let other people define your mood for you. Decide what's interesting to do for you, what would feel meaningful, and go for it. And so that's why I want to tell the story we did. And this can be done over and over and over. This isn't about grasslands. This is about ambition to make the world a better place.
Your positivity, your optimism, which bleeds through the pages of your books, and I can see it, in your face right now. Is that a choice that you've made? Is it a natural temperament, or is it kind of fact informed? Are you kind of just looking at what's actually happening in the world and on the ground, and that feeds into that optimism?
Yeah. It's both. It's both. So the first part of that is a choice, and I ended up going to college totally by accident. Never intended to because I wasn't a particularly good student in the younger, kindergarten in the United States is called K through 12, kindergarten through the end of high school. and had a lot of struggles for various reasons. Fidgety, didn't pay attention, got in lots of trouble. Was younger than most people in my class because they started me at 4, et cetera, all kinds of things. Um, Never intended to go to college. I was a weapons system mechanic working on construction, and the union I was in went on strike, so I was quickly broke. And thanks to my mom, she said, "You ought to give college a try." So I applied to Bozeman, Montana, and I don't know why, but they let me in. So I ended up getting a psychology degree, and I still use it every single day. And I learned about these classic Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers and all these different folks who talked about taking charge of your own destiny. And this was not pop psychology. This was in depth understanding how the human brain works. And we're mostly afraid of losing things. Our greatest fears are about losing what we already have. And we don't spend a whole lot of creative thinking about how could we move more in the direction of something that's more satisfying than what I'm feeling right now. And successful people are folks who can mitigate those feelings of protecting myself from loss, instead spending most of your time on that forward-looking thing. And somehow that really rang true for me. Kennedy had been shot, Nixon was the president, got thrown out, impeached. Vietnam War was, 55,000 Americans were killed in that war. This was tumultuous times, and trying to decide, can one person make a difference? Can one person actually carve out a satisfying, meaningful life was a big topic then. So it just hit it. So yeah, I kind of rewired myself for that, and that I'm going to decide, what satisfaction, what success looks like for me. The other thing that keeps me informed, that informs my optimism, because I go looking for ideas of where cool things are happening and what parts of those ideas can we steal and put together into something. Um, the second thing, though, is now I'm not trying to build really anything. Um, the time of life I'm in, this particular phase, but I do enjoy keeping up on trends. And so, for instance, as you know, prior to the pandemic, just prior to the pandemic, quite a few different books came out that were all, it's kind of an interesting time, all kind of saying the same thing. We had to create a vision for the entire world on what rework our relationship to nature. Because right now, things are not going so well. This is 2014 to 2019 or so. And one book kind of pulled it all together. It wasn't necessarily the best one, but it was pithy. And that came from Ed Wilson. It's called Half Earth. And he said, we really ought to take on Ed. I've met him numerous times. He's actually got some YouTube videos on American Prairie. Super guy, passed away a few years ago. He said, a cool goal would be, why don't we get back to where things were some decades ago, where about 50% of the world, terrestrial and marine surfaces, are designated for nature, and human beings can have the rest to do all their enterprises. It's more elaborate than that. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Mhm.
But that set off this idea of, well, what would that take to get there? One, we should break it down into smaller increments. How about 40% of the world by 2040? How about 30% of the earth by 2030? That's where 30 by 30 came from. It's the first step on the way, on multiple steps to 2050. And then people started saying, what if we all signed up to try? We don't know how we're going to get to this destination, but it's a hell of a vision. It's a great way to start. Hell of a vision. And then what if we sign up for this? Well, now 192 countries out of the current 196 countries, depending on if you count the Vatican or whatever, that exist today, signed up to try to achieve 2050. That's pretty amazing. First time in history, the entire world is, most of the world, 98% of the world is signed up to try to achieve one vision. Later on, of course, like any good strategic planning session, well, we can't boil the ocean here. We got to pick what are the most important things to work on. What's the ratio principle? The 20% of the effort that'll give us 80% of the big bang for the buck. And they narrowed down, 30 ideas down to 15, and then down to 10, then down to 8, and then down to 4. And now, you hear David Attenborough and Your World There, and many other people say, here are the big 4 things we got to work on to have any chance of getting to 2030, 2040, 2050. And those are stabilize global population, human population, accelerate the transition to green energy, The third one is rewild everything you can and do it faster. And the biggest one by far is redo how we do agriculture, because that's the most destructive thing out there in terms of taking things away from nature. How we fish, how we farm, how we raise livestock, etc. And so when I started looking at those, I mean, that's great stuff, and it's on repeat now in movies and documentaries and books, etc., which is good. That's how movements get started, and a lot of people are chasing those goals and trying to emphasize important work in those four areas. Is if you and I get off this podcast and we just check in on that, use whatever your favorite AI search engine is or whatever, or if you don't trust AI, find another way. Go to the library, whatever. Do some download some you know science articles or whatever. You'll find excellent progress happening in all four of those areas. Not uniformly. I'm sitting in the US. We're one of the worst, or almost in some ways a backward country in that way. But we're only one of 196 countries. And I get around the world quite a bit. And it's pretty exciting when you look at it holistically or globally. What's moving in those four areas I just described is pretty darn cool. All of them need to go faster. But if you take the long view, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, to me, it's looking pretty good.
If someone's thinking about, 30 by 2030 or 50 by 2050, they're moved, they're motivated by something. There's a passion behind that. And I'm wondering what it is exactly for you. Is it wanting to live, or, having, your ancestors live in a more ecologically intact environment? Is it wanting to feel kind of enchanted by everyday wildlife? And it usually comes from a place of some sort of ecological boredom or depletion behind that. And I'm wondering if that's kind of behind you in some way.
Yeah, it's a really important question you're asking. Understanding motivation. That's back to my accidental degree in psychology, which I wouldn't have gotten had that strike not happened. Uh, it's really important to try to understand, why do we as humans do things? Why do we get fired? Why do we get so fired up to try to make things different? And I got luckily, having grown up mostly in Montana, I got to do a stint in Santa Cruz, California with my wife, Kayla, and both our kids were born there actually. And I worked a lot with different organizations as a consultant, organization development consultant. And they were all trying to make things, improve things. And in the book, I talk about one that quite a number of people, it's getting to be an old analogy now, but Moore's Law came from Gordon Moore, who's one of the founders of Intel, that the amount of transistors you could put on a chip, which makes it run faster, do more higher level computation, all that kind of stuff, will double roughly every 2.5 years. And people say, "Sounds good, Gordon. At what point does that, taper off?" And he goes, "Never." And it's been decades and it hasn't changed. It's an attitude about continuous improvement. And once you adopt that attitude about continuous improvement about something, some of them do that with their running. How far can I run? Can I do
Mhm.
marathons and stuff? It's taking on an attitude of continuous improvement. For Gordon Moore, it's about computer chips. I couldn't care less about computer chips and how do you make them run fast without melting the entire computer and all that kind of stuff. It was a game. And there's a lot of people at the time in Silicon Valley while I was there in the 80s and early 90s that just love the game. It doesn't matter what it is, try to make Bluetooth work better or something. So I'm not sure it's any more complicated than that for me, Ken. Uh, I decided I like the continuous improvement thing. I've always wanted to see if year by year I could be a better dad. I have two kids. Now I've got two grandkids. Can I, what does it mean to be a really great grandparent to these grandkids? What can I provide? Their parents are providing plenty for them as far as getting them to school and they have enough clothes and all that kind of stuff. What's How can I be a better granddad or whatever? I like the continuous improvement idea. It's fun. Um, and I thought, well, why don't I apply it to something that I really care about? And that's wildlife, nature, environment, because I know what it does for people like you and your nephew walking across. I know that was arduous and it was hot on some days, and you probably saw a mosquito or two, but you also saw the Milky Way at night or looked at the cosmos in the way most people in the world don't have the privilege to do, right? Because of that just unbelievable darkness. So trying to push the idea of, hey, things are kind of out of control with our species. We just keep taking up more and more land to feed our livestock, feed ourselves, build our highways, and build our airports and stuff. But what are we doing for future generations? It's not great, and nature is losing rapidly. And there's a way to bring that back, I think, and flourish and prosper ourselves as a species if we just look at doing it differently. So that was, I wanted to be involved in the continuous improvement world in a topic area that meant a lot to me. And I could have done it lots of other things that need improving, that are equally or very, very important, so,
That's
but
interesting for me to hear because I thought maybe part of your motivation is, you want to go out into this prairie meadow and raise your arms in the sky and twirl around and have like this Lewis and Clark Serengeti experience. And I think that's kind of what I want. I used to be a park ranger up in the gates of the Arctic National Park, which is a pretty much intact ecosystem, and I just felt a sort of high from the sublime and seeing a herd of caribou and seeing a moose in the woods and a grizzly bear. And I know what it's like not to have those things in my life. So that's
mhm.
kind of one of my motivations for wanting these things. Um,
I do that. It's for myself personally, but I live in Montana. Like, as we hang up, it's too cold to get on my bike, but I get in my car, my little electric car, and I could drive 15 minutes and be in the woods and have a decent chance of seeing at least some deer. If I walk a little further, some elk. Bears are sleeping right now. So, um, I am very privileged to have quick access to that kind of thing. But it's not just about Montana. I've been diving off the coast of Panama. I've, and, tromping around all through Southeast Asia quite a few times, and remote, areas there where there's few people and lots of wildlife. Been out in the ocean a lot to know what that feels like to be far, far away from land and feel very, very small, in a marine environment, and seeing the, seabirds and everything. And I've gotten to go get around quite a bit, Africa. And it doesn't matter what the biome is, water, terrestrial, doesn't really matter. Having those experiences, it is selfish because it's unbelievably rejuvenating, just feels like an amazing privilege. So I do want that for other people. I have grandkids now. I feel like I should do the best I can to try to make sure there's still space left, for them to have the same kinds of experiences. And if we don't get after it, it's not going to be left, because left to our own devices, we will take it all. We'll take it all for our needs. We'll plow it up. Um, we'll, to grow monoculture crops to feed our livestock or whatever, we will take it all. There's no restrictions on where we go and what we do, really. So, or very few, not enough restrictions. So, you have to play offense on this stuff, is how I feel about it.
Let me back up for a second, if you don't mind, because you in your book you kind of go back to your early childhood and your past, and there's always linkages to your time at American Prairie. I'm thinking of the passage where you talk about your mom and dad selling silverware, and I know you would eventually have to do a lot of selling of American Prairie, getting people to be interested in it and getting money through fundraising. Fundraising, by the way, sounds about like the last job in the world I'd ever want to have. But first of all, can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit more about what you learned from your parents and selling that silverware? What's the art of the deal from them?
Uh, I'm the youngest of three kids, and when you don't have much awareness, but my parents told me what was going on when I was 3 and 4 years old. My dad worked for the Boeing company, but he actually started off sweeping floors in their big in North Bay, Ontario, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, different places, and worked his way up to supervisor in warehouses and stuff like that. Didn't make a whole lot of money, but he had things he wanted. And what he wanted was a used fishing boat and a used 35 horse used motor so he could fish. He didn't make enough money with three kids, to buy extras. So in those days, there's a lot of stuff that got sold door to door in the evenings. This is in the early 60s. And so one thing is you could come home from your day job and then have dinner and then go out afterwards and moonlight with your own job. You could sell Amway, you could sell all kinds of stuff. But my dad, he would change his clothes after dinner and head out, and he'd be gone for 2 hours in the evenings. And he had this really beautiful briefcase, and he'd open it up on the porch and say, "I'm selling silverware." People would invite him in, and they'd sit down. That was, well, we'll take a set of those salad forks and stuff like that. And that's how he made extra money, and he got a boat. And then my parents wanted to build a cabin or buy a small, very inexpensive piece of land in Montana. This is years later, and I watched them do the same thing. My mom sold Avon products. I don't know if you ever heard of Avon, but
Of
it's
course, yeah.
perfumes and things like that out of our house. So they would have parties at our house where all their friends would come over, and there's catalogs and there's all this perfume, and my dad's serving drinks, gin and tonics and stuff. And I'm just watching these two, and they were able to buy this very inexpensive piece of land. Is probably, I don't know, $9,000 or something. At the time, it's a lot of money for them, huge, but they did it through moonlighting on top of their day jobs. My mom was a social worker for the welfare department, and my dad was working still in the blue collar world at Boeing. But these evenings, they worked together as a team, and they pulled it off. And what I learned was it doesn't matter what you're selling, is if you want something to happen, there's always a way to do it. You may have to give up your evenings or your Saturday mornings, but there is a way to make it happen if you think in innovative ways and also rely on great teamwork. They got along very well in the way they did that. So
Rely on
yeah, that
teamwork
was a good good.
and the gin and tonic too, right? That was probably a key component of the sale.
Endless, endless. Yeah, the bar. It was a hosted bar. It was open the whole time. Yeah, my mom sold a lot of Tupperware. That's for sure.
So so fundraising, I haven't explained to the listeners how American Prairie has built itself up. Now, American Prairie has to buy private land off of willing sellers, whether farmers, ranchers, whatever, and sometimes you get leasing rights to Bureau of Land Management land as well. So you need to raise a lot of money to buy this property. So fundraising, is it as bad as it sounds, or is there some fun in it as well? What's your attitude towards fundraising?
Uh, my attitude was not good when we started because I'd never done it before, and just building the project itself and figuring out all the intricacies of making it go well in a high quality fashion as you unfolded the thing over the years seemed like enough demand on me to think about that and build a proper team to address that over a very long period of time. And I made one big mistake, in addition, many came after that, but I assumed that it would be very similar to for profit enterprises, of which I had a lot of experience working around the world with a company we built in Santa Cruz, three of us. And I thought, all right, I'm going to be the main leader here, and I'm going to have to figure out how to do some fundraising, even though I've never done it. I'll ask a lot of people for advice. I'll read every book I can get on it, which that did occur, and just start muscling my way along and try to get better through repetition and familiarity. Um, eh, I d- I did get better at it for sure, but what I was hoping was what I saw in early stage companies. Eventually, you can hire yourself a senior vice president of sales.
Mhm.
And then as a leader, you can't really forget about it because you got to have a weekly meeting. How's it going down there in the southern region? How's it going in our European markets and stuff like that? Let's check in. But the person who sweats it and stays up all night is worrying about the next quarter and can we close the next quarter with some profit or whatever, is the VP of sales and her huge team of salespeople, wherever she has people deployed. And the CEO, it's just a small portion of your thought process. And what I realized is in nonprofits, kind of no matter how big they get, you don't really get to do that. You have to be in the game.
Is that right?
And
So you're always kind of involved in it.
well, as best I can tell, and I've really important for our listeners, I've run exactly one nonprofit. That's my data point. I'm not an expert in this still today, but a lot of people I talk to who are running much bigger enterprises than American Prairie, far bigger, they said, Sean, it never changes. You always got to fly to London or somewhere to go have dinner with so and so to tip it. take it from almost have the gift to over the gift and get a handshake, a lot of times the CEO has to be there. And so you have to plan, you have to think about how you're going to do it, what's it going to look like, what are you shooting for? You're shooting too high, you're shooting too low, leaving money on the table, all the strategizing. And it's a huge thing. So, and this is, our fault. We picked a model. You can do conservation other ways. You can use conservation easements where in America, I don't know how to describe this so it works for everybody, like all your listeners around the world, but you can go to a landowner who has private property and say, can we interest you in a conservation easement? What that means is if you promise not to build out any more infrastructure, just keep your house and your barns and whatever else, but don't put a subdivision here of homes and condominiums, things like that, we can give you a break, very big break on your taxes, actually, not just this year, but over the course of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years. These can be worth in the area of hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're willing to sign all these agreements to not do certain things on your property and leave it kind of as is, open space, and all these different kinds of things. That is a conservation tool that is quite popular in the United States. But what we wanted to try to do, our criteria for success with bringing back abundant wildlife and all the things we considered, we thought, you know what, you guys, we got to own it ourselves. We have to own it ourselves. And that's great because you have the power to decide what happens. You don't have to control other people over and over and over again to operate or behave in different ways. And the downside is that's hideously expensive to go as big as we're trying to go, and to somehow find the money around the
Yeah.
world to do it with all the huge amount of competition for philanthropy out there. And conservation is not very high on the list of what people give to. They give money to football stadiums, they give money to their churches, they give money to lots of other things before conservation is way down the list. So you're kind of digging for scraps there.
It's there's risk baked into all of this, and if I'm wearing my English major hat, I'd say that your book is a huge theme of risk in the book. You're always considering a risk, you're always taking a risk. Like even the episode where your wife Kayla gets sucked beneath some rapids on a kayak trip, and what was she under the water for like 8 or 9 minutes there?
Hmm.
I don't know how
Hmm.
anybody could survive that.
Yeah,
But there's risk kind of everywhere. Like, do you see yourself as a risk taker?
I get asked that a lot, and that's why I wrote a whole chapter. I'm assuming you got that far in the book about how I think about risk taking, and that I don't really like. I don't. Mm, I don't think take find myself taking risks that I haven't thought out well. And so I'm voracious about always learning new tools for taking more intelligent risks. And I think sometimes people say, well, should I bag my job and move across the country to take this other job? And they'll get a piece of paper and draw a line vertically down the middle and say, what are the pros and what are the cons? And they'll list out a bunch of pros leaving this job and moving across the country or across the UK or wherever to take this other job, move my family, whatever. And here are some of the cons. And that's about as far as they get. But risk taking really has a lot more sophistication to it than that. It has to not only just have cerebral thought processes, which are those two lists, there's a big emotional component in it. There's a lot to think about. What do I have in terms of resources to what if it all goes sideways? How can I recover? Really thinking that through seriously. So if the worst case happens, do you have the right resources or skills or attitude or whatever it takes to actually recover from it? In other words, you're not going to die. Even
Hmm.
if it turns out to be a not a great decision, you go, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and now we're over here, it just didn't work. As long as you can recover, figure out ahead of time that you have a good recovery strategy, should it not go well. There's lots of things to think about. And that's why I put that chapter in there about how to take better risk taking. I think a lot of people will not make even a job change, like from, say, you're an attorney right now and not very happy in a big law firm and you're doing 70, 80 hours a week, et cetera, and making lots of money, but maybe it's not as fulfilling as you thought it was going to be. and you're thinking about jumping into conservation, for instance, I make that analogy quite a bit. That seems like a big risk when you've got a mortgage, you're saving for maybe higher education for some people who want to do that for their kids, save for college and things like that. Not everybody, but it feels like a big risk to take the leap into conservation. Happened to me. My salary was cut in half, but there's no way I'd ever look back. It was a very good decision. It turned out to be a really good decision. But I think we don't get taught. Think about, from the time you're 5 years old until you're 12 and leave high school, which is what most people in the United States, that's as far as you get. Most adults in the United States, about 35, 36% ever achieve a 4-year college degree. So the highest level of education here is high school. And nowhere in kindergarten through 12th grade does anybody is there a class on risk. They'll say you need to take a foreign language. You definitely need to learn German, but you learn absolutely nothing about taking risks. And here we're in a capitalist society where risk taking is needed, and
Mm,
no one tells you how to do it. So a lot of people sit in jobs they don't like anymore because back to that thing about loss. Most people the biggest motivation is to not lose what I already have. Even if what I have feels suboptimal, I don't want to put it at risk. And there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who just died a little while ago. Highly, highly recommend that book because it explains this. And if you can shift your thinking to being focused on how do I get myself excited about this possible next better thing, better situation for myself, for my family, whatever, as opposed to spinning and spinning and spinning on protecting myself and not losing what I've already achieved, uh, you might have some really exciting times ahead of you. So I try to write about that. Is listen to Kahneman and other people like them that can articulate this better than I can. They're absolutely dead on. Is learn to take intelligent risks and practice it. Get desensitized to taking risks. Not crazy things, jumping off of cliffs with a too small parachute and go paragliding and things like that. I'm not talking about that. Things that may take you to a more satisfying existence. That doesn't mean being richer. It means feeling like, you know, just what I'm doing now feels truly important. Yeah. I think a lot of people want that, but they don't want to lose what they've gained.
yeah.
That's a trap. It's a trap.
So you've kind of figured out the art of the risk almost to the point where the risk isn't even a risk anymore. It's something you've kind of
Exactly.
really picked apart.
Yeah.
And before this, you were a consultant. You were working in Silicon Valley. I'm sure you've worked with countless organizations, and I'm wondering what you think about like when an organization begins. Does it kind of need that someone or that team that's kind of very bold, visionary minded, and calculated risk taker? Did American Prairie need that sort of attitude starting off? Someone who's gonna break a few eggs to make an omelet. And after that, does something else need to happen once the place has been established and matured and maybe you don't need that boldness and, risk taking and visionary? Do you know where I'm going with this question?
hmm I think so. So give my answer. Tell me if I was where you're going, where you're headed there with it, where your intent is. But I got very lucky. Well, first, my answer is yes. I think in some instances, depending on what the task is, it is very helpful to have someone who's willing to break some eggs, or in American parlance, break some dishes, pull in a china shop kind of thing. I think yes, and okay, we'll break some dishes, we'll fix them later, but we're moving ahead. Or another analogy is we're going to keep going in our boat, and we may take a lot of holes in the hull. As long as most of them are above the water line, none are below the water line, we'll patch them later. We got a good welder on board. When we hit some smooth seas, we can throw her over the side and she can weld up those holes. But let's keep moving forward. You need someone with that kind of attitude for sure, often. Um, so let's see. The other thing, though, I think is let me just leave it at that. Is that what you're looking for? So my answer is
Sure.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have some other things to expound on, but I'm giving you some long answers. So
It's okay.
absolutely, and I think the what's underlying the attitude for me with that is I got very lucky. This is where I was headed. I got very lucky by being able to work in a lot of different industries and seeing people pull off amazing things. One of my favorites is early stage biotech. Some of the things people were chasing to try to make things better for HIV, for malaria, for breast cancer, and all these kind of things they're trying to solve, making artificial human skin. So 7-year-olds who've been burned in a fire would have, this beautiful supple skin to repair their bodies with. All this got the stuff I got to work in, what their business was, and they actually made progress with stuff that nobody thought could be solved. They were solving it. And they're solving it incrementally, detail by detail by detail. These are amazing bench scientists. Were in Southern California, whatever. I saw the same thing in technology, but in other kinds of industries as well. And what I came to believe is if you get the right people in your team, part of it's their attitude or their skills or their ways of looking at things, which are different than mine. They'll look through a different lens at a problem. And you can bake into the culture, the demand you have for your culture, good teamwork and listening and collective problem solving and all of that, as long as you can build the right kind of culture and get the right individuals together, it doesn't really matter what problem's going to come up. They will figure it out. They will solve it.
Mm,
And I got enough experience being around teams of all different kinds of industries where that occurred. Sometimes they would stumble and get stuck, usually interpersonal problems, things like that. That's why we got called in to get things, oftentimes to get things unstuck and keep moving forward. Um, but I got to see it. And I realized this can occur if I can put the right people together and create a very specific culture that if you don't want to be a part of this culture, go work somewhere else. Has these values around execution, around innovation and optimism, around teamwork, openness with respect, all these things, these 6 or 7 facets that shape a culture. If you can get terrifically bright people to come in and be interested in operating inside a culture like that, you're pretty unstoppable as an organization.
mm.
And a founder can depart and it keeps cooking. That's a really cool thing.
It appears like that has happened.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
let's stick with the problems for a second, and this is one digression into the politics, which I don't even think is going to turn into a political question.
Okay.
But I'd like to talk about Montana Governor's Greg Gianforte. I don't know if that's how to pronounce it, but he and
Mhm.
4 congressmen, they sent a letter to Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, and I think to kind of boil it down, it was to keep bison off of the land that you lease from the Bureau of Land Management. Is that it in a nutshell there?
Yes, it's to challenge the decision that was made by the Bureau of Land Management to allow American Prairie to graze bison as livestock on public lands, of which, for folks who aren't in the States, I know a lot of people are not from the States listening to this. The Bureau of Land Management is the largest land operator in America. I think I'm going to get this close, about 280 million acres, which is a lot. I don't know how to translate that exactly to hectares, but uh, you can buy a base property, which is in your private property. Let's say it's 5,000 acres, and you can accumulate. You can also then have the opportunity to lease mm, an additional 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 acres of public land. Doesn't mean you own it. Doesn't mean you can keep other people off of it. So there's a whole freedom to roam aspect to it on public lands, which is really terrific. But you're allowed to graze a livestock animal on that, and there's 6. There's llamas, goats, sheep, cows, horses, and bison. Those are all registered livestock animals. So oftentimes when we get this, we'll say we want to take cows off, beef cattle, and put on bison. It could have been horses, take the horses off, put on llamas, or llamas off, put on goats. And there's a process for doing this. The Bureau of Land Management studies it extremely carefully, making sure that what you're asking is not going to cause any adverse effects for the public because they're doing this good. They are trying to do right by the general public. They're not trying to emphasize what you want. They want to make sure if you want to put these bison on or these llamas or goats or whatever you're trying to exchange to, you're not going to take away from the enjoyment of these public lands by the general public because that's who it's for. It's not you and your bison or you and your mining or you and your life, forest, your forest products business, whatever it is. This is the public's land, and you're borrowing a little bit um, through this lease. But we need to stand up for the public,
And
and
it
so
seems
we pass that, and they've got a decision. Yes, we're fine, and then but some particularly of certain industries, oil and gas, uh, livestock, mining, etc., are not pleased. Sometimes with that, just how it goes in the states. Depending on the industry. And so it's being
the
the decision is being challenged. Nobody's suing us. It's challenged. Did Bureau of Land Management do the right thing? That's basically it.
and their position to me, just to speak frankly, seems ridiculous. I'd like to see bison be able to go on that land, whether for reasons of conservation or livestock or whatever. But I just want to read what they wrote um, in this letter. For us, a decision in favor of American Prairie will reshape the entire landscape of our state. Montana's most profitable economic industry for decades has been agriculture. American Prairie threatens the economic vitality of our most important industry, decreasing agricultural production revenue and directly impacting industries downstream that shape our overall economy. Now, my first reaction to that is just someone who's kind of watching things from afar is just like, for fuck's sake. I mean, come on. Like, you're embellishing, you're exaggerating, you're discounting American Prairie's role in the local economy. And if I was on your team, if I was on the American Prairie team, I think I would have been able to like hold my tongue that one time. But if this thing happens like 1,000 times, you know, I might kind of lose self control one of those times, and say that thing over social media or whatever. It seems like American Prairie has never made that mistake, and I don't know your whole 25-year history, but I'm kind of just wondering, like, how is that? If that's true, how is that the case? How does your team have so much discipline with these big headaches sometimes?
Well, we take medication, lithium, and stuff like that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You got to keep it together for sure. I think because we take the long view, and so we're a big believer in sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back in terms of progress for the project, which is can be exceedingly frustrating, particularly when sometimes it feels unfair. But overall, we keep moving forward on all the important fronts, or in a business, you call them critical success factors, things that have to go well. And you really would like to not see them go not well. We do pretty well, or I should say, I keep saying we because it still seems like I'm around, but and I'm not. It's important to know I'm not running it. But they now are really good at keeping all the critical success factors in mind and making progress. Sometimes it's not spectacular and bright and shiny progress, but it is important progress nonetheless. Taking the long view, sticking with it, and realizing you can't win every single day. So I think that's how it happens there. And yeah, it can things can there's lots of frustrations in trying to do rewilding for sure anywhere in the world. I'm sure if you talk to somebody from Greece or Croatia or Bulgaria or Romania or France or Scotland or wherever, these folks, everybody experiences the same thing. And usually it comes from some kind of industry, commercial fishing, logging, mining, livestock, whatever it might be. That's usually the challenge is. But take the long view and realize, kind of time's on your side. Um, you can, I don't know if you can really relax in your attitude, but yeah, keep taking those medications. I think it helps. So,
It seems liberating. It seems like, oh, there's going to be a couple steps backwards. This is one of those steps. We're going to
mhm,
take another couple forward. I can
yeah.
see kind of the liberating mentality in there. Um, Diplomacy. I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about American Prairie is you have to kind of present the country, the world, donors, whatever, like this big vision. This is going to be America's next Serengeti. You know, we're going to kind of bring back what was here hundreds of years ago. That's very exciting. You're going to get people donating, supporting, coming to visit, and whatnot. But yet, at the same time, you don't want to freak out the locals too much. You don't want to come across as too radical and too extreme. That must have been very difficult for you to walk that line.
Well, what's difficult is parsing your time, the ratio of time you spend on different things, particularly in the early days of any kind of entrepreneurial business, which this certainly was for the first 8 or 9, 10 years. It's hard to devote as much time as to all the things that need proper time. So traveling out of the state to try to find money to keep the enterprise going and keep everybody paid, and when an opportunity to buy a piece of land came up, to have at least enough money for a down payment, then running around down to banks trying to see if we get loans, and most people wouldn't give us a loan at the time because we're too sketchy early on. Trying to take care of all that, hiring the right kinds of people, building the culture, like I talked about, that takes time and attention. You can't just do that, in your spare time. It's a big focus to nurture that, to slowly build an organization that can then manage this whole thing. All that takes time, but being on the ground trying to help people not freak out also means you can't just send emails or text them. You have to be in front of people at their houses, meet them in bars, meet them in town somewhere, meet them in groups in gymnasiums of public schools, and listen to 50 people at once, who are upset about something. It takes a lot of time. That was the hardest thing, is doing all the things you need to do in the first 8 or 10 years and keep them all in a quality fashion and show up enough to all those things that I just talked about. And you're just too small as an organization to do it appropriately all the time. So that's a difficult thing. Now it's much better. There's 50 employees. You have people who specialize in staying very close to the public, making sure every question is answered. They can come in, look under the hood, is an old analogy of a car, come in and take a look at how we operate. They can investigate the bison disease protocols and realize our bison have no disease, so they don't have to fear disease coming in from our bison. All these kind of things, that takes a lot, and it takes a special kind of people to be accepted by folks who are skeptical. So, now it's a lot different. Now I think the trust and the acceptance of who American Prairie is on a very nice track. Starts with the quality of people who work for American Prairie. I'm not there anymore, so I'm not talking about myself. And the consistency of showing up as many times as you're asked to come speak to county commissioners, as many times as you're asked to speak at a high school somewhere, or to talk to the Port Authority, or whoever it is who wants to see you again and ask that question one more time and hear a more elaborate answer. They don't want a text, they don't want an email. They want to sit down with you and talk with you until they have no more questions to ask. Yeah. So
Gotcha. I've got some rapid fire questions for you, Sean. You can elaborate if you want, but you can keep them short too, if that's all right. Is that all right?
yeah.
Um, Early in your book, you talk about this amazing magazine article that you took with you on some trip to Southeast Asia, but you don't name the name of the article or the magazine. Did you forget?
uh, I'll tell you one thing that happened. I think I probably put it in, and the editors, a guy named Gene Stone, he's done like 60 books editing, and he's tough. He'll go, people don't care about all these details shown. We're going to strip them all out. So I'd send them a chapter, 10,000 words, 11,000 words. They'd send back 8,800 words to me. I go, where's the rest of it? Well, we took out all the dumb details nobody really cares about. So that probably is on the cutting room floor somewhere, I guess. I don't know. It came from the Menninger Clinic in 1983.
Mhm.
Let's see. That's when I was in Southeast Asia for about 6 months. So I think on that, I've been a number of times, but that particular time that I described it, I carried around my pack for a couple of months, and I finally was in Pangandaran on Java in Indonesia, and I took it out and I read it, and then I read it over and over again on bus rides and on boats, and Kayla and I were traveling around. But yeah, it came out of a study by the Menninger Clinic. I think they're in Topeka, Kansas. They're in Kansas. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. It was 45 years ago. But they were studying all different kinds of people who Um, it's hard to paraphrase exactly what it, I probably said it better in the book, but we're satisfied with life. And they're from all different kinds of economic background. That's really important. People who did not have a whole lot of money but were satisfied. They are all different skin color, all different backgrounds. And there's an incredible mix. That's what really impressed me. And the attitude they had about, so rather than studying people who are experiencing dysfunction, depression, anxiety, and things like that. It was let's focus on first one of the first big studies, focus on people who seem to be doing abnormally well. And even though objectively you think they shouldn't because they're driving a really crummy car and it needs a muffler and the tires don't look so good and all this, how can they possibly be satisfied in general with how things are going? So that that just kept pushing me forward with psychology and my because I went back to school after we came back from some of these trips. No, wait a second. I did not. I was done with school. Sorry about that. I'm rewriting history here. I
It's
kept
okay.
going with my own looking. I kept going with my own studies about this and why how people operate in this way.
And this launched
And I
you on a
guess,
career, consultancy.
yeah,
I'm
so
definitely gonna
you,
see if I can find this and put it in the show notes.
yeah,
Use my internet sleuthing skills. We'll see.
go back to the manager clinic. I'm probably getting the town wrong. I think it was Topeka, Kansas, and they did this study. You know what? You know who gave it to me? It was Ann Gerasimus. And she is in her 80s, and I can find her. She's in Washington, D.C. I'll work on that, Ken.
Please do,
Yeah.
please do. Okay, next that wasn't quite a rapid fire question or answer, but this doesn't
I
need to
know
be
you,
rapid fire.
gosh, you're really tapping into really
What
dusty areas of my brain.
what's, one great American Prairie memory that stands out as a point of pride to you?
Um, I'm having difficulty just picking one as the problem because one thing I've learned is it took me a long time, but by the time I started American Prairie, I was a little bit, I was kind of what is currently the millennials now. They're in their 40s, right? I didn't do this in my early 20s, and I'd learned over time to, when something goes well, first stop and just recognize it. There's
Mhm,
another step, and that is to give yourself a few minutes to savor what it is you're observing or hearing or experiencing. So I learned to do that. And there were so many difficult things that were so frustrating and felt unfair, like that letter you just talked about. This is just one in hundreds of things that's happened over the last 25 years
okay.
that are feels difficult. And why is this happening to us? You know how we all start to feel. But the importance of recognizing here is a small indicator of something I should be very pleased by. And rather than just going, huh, and then moving on and stepping on the gas in some vehicle because I'm late to a meeting or something up and, driving up a gravel road or whatever, to stop, shut the car off, actually, or figuratively, metaphorically, and just sit for a second and savor what I'm looking at because I'm about to then go headlong into a difficult afternoon with meetings I don't want to go to, with people who are trying to block our way or whatever. And so I have lots and lots of examples. That's why I'm having a hard time. Just I have so many because I'd learned to do that. But by the time I wish I'd learned it sooner in my 20s and early 30s, but I'd learned to do that by my early 40s and still do it today. So here's an example. I think I put this in the book. I'm sure I did. I was driving north on this 55-mile long road that goes north, a gravel road that goes north up to Malta, and I had to be to First State Bank to talk to a banker there. And some things had happened early in the morning with some bison and stuff, and I didn't get in the car as soon as I should have. So I'm bailing up the road. I stopped by a campground, and one of our campgrounds that we built, and there's a couple. Nobody else in the campground except one couple. And the husband was sitting, typical camping scene. He's in a chair. He's got a big floppy hat on. He's reading a book, enjoying the birds, all kinds of birds around him, sprigs, pipit, not or um, uh, meadowlarks, and all different kinds of birds around him. So we're just having a nice morning in this campground, which made me feel good. His wife, or I guess a female companion, was over on a little bit of a slope and looking down, and there was 8 or 9. 10, 11 something bull bison, all big bulls. This was in the spring, green grass, and the bulls kind of get pushed away because the females are off in kind of these mother groups that have new calves with them. They don't want the bulls around. So the bulls just kind of hang out, nothing to do during this particular month. And they're all lounging around too. And this woman has a little Instamatic camera, is taking pictures of them, and I can't hear what she's saying because she's far away, and she's turning around talking to her male companion sitting in the chair. They look like they're in their 70s or so, have an old van they're camping out of with a local license plate. And I stopped and looked at it and I said, this looks like what have seen since I was a kid in Yellowstone Park. I still live about an hour from Yellowstone Park, so I'm familiar with the scenes there. People just simply enjoying nature, absolutely dead quiet out here. They're staying in a campground that costs them $16 a night. It has water, it has power, all this. And they can stay here all day doing what they're doing. And they're looking at these magnificent 2,000-pound animals lounging on this little hillside. They're like 100 feet away from her down this slope. And she can stand there observing them as long as she wants and take as many pictures as she wants. But the bison are also free to do what they want. They can get up and walk 9, 10, 11 miles in one direction and not have a fence if they want to go sit somewhere else. And it's just this bucolic scene that I thought, it's two people, it's just a little group of 11 bison, but the sound and what this morning feels like in the air and the smell of the sagebrush, because it's spring, it's very pungent at that time. I said, this is like a miniature Yellowstone like experience. This is exactly what we wanted to create so people could enjoy the heck out of it and have a time out of time in nature like this with no sense of rush, and all around them the bugs, the flora, the birds, the big charismatic animals. It's all there for them to sit there, enjoy, and relax. And I just sat there in the truck, which made me even later, but I didn't care. I was doing a little savoring thing for about, honestly, it probably lasted 8 or 9 minutes. It was not a 2 hour thing, and I didn't get out and do yoga and meditate and stuff like that. And then I fired up the truck and took off. I'm sure I was late for my meeting, but I did that over and over and over and over when I saw certain things happening, and I have tons of them in my memory, which really, the frustrating things like that letter, all those things fall away. And what
Mhm.
stick are those moments of savoring progress.
What a nice portrait you've just drawn, and it's a portrait that wouldn't have existed if you hadn't done what you've done. So not only is it a beautiful thing to see, but it's also kind of a validation of the decades of work you've put into it. Um, my next
Yeah.
question is one great non-American Prairie memory that stands out as a point of pride,
In any particular topic?
and I guess anything. Like, it's way too broad, but does anything come to mind?
Oh, gosh, it's just I've had a very fortunate existence. I think maybe holding my young grandson Lewis for the very first time when he was a teeny tiny baby, and then his little sister Simone. Uh, Nothing quite like that. That's about as, the feeling you're sitting there and you're getting fairy dust sprinkled all over you. That's hard to beat. Mm. I think, well, yeah, I think maybe, honestly, sometimes when I'm doing these podcasts, like the ones you've been listening to that I'm taping people, when I'm done and turn off all the microphones, kind of shut down the studio like you and I are sitting in here, and stand up and go get myself another cup of coffee and go stand out on the deck and think about that person I just had the privilege of talking to. And I'll probably go visit the project in Scotland or California or Namibia or wherever it is. Probably eventually get there, because it's so interesting, and just the chance to meet them in person would be so cool. But the privilege of being able to talk to these folks and then standing there knowing that as soon as they hung up, they jumped right back into it, their
Mm,
thing, what it is they're trying to make happen. And they're barreling ahead. They love the challenge, and they get frustrating things like that letter you described too. But they're pushing through it, and sometimes they get knocked backwards, and they just wait, they take a breath, and they're going to move forward. And you can tell from their attitude, they're going to pull this off. They're making the world a better place for future generations, for people who haven't even been born yet and will never remember their names. Like they're not going to remember my name, but they're going to be glad somebody did this thing, like that marine protected area off of California, or the Torres Reserve in Scotland. There are all these different things that I get to talk to people about. That 5 or 10 minutes after I hang up, and I just go out and stand on my deck with my coffee and stretch a little bit because I've been sitting for too long and think about them. That's quite a high. It really is.
Hmm. Hmm. I don't know what I'm going to be doing when we close this. Probably something quite mundane, like hanging out with my 6-year-old daughter. Um,
Yeah.
I want to pitch a book idea to you. I've been thinking about this question, and I'm going to wrap this up soon enough. But I'm really eager to hear about what you think of my book pitch. I've published 3 books. My last one was kind of a visionary. Let's bring the right to roam to America
Yeah.
from Scotland.
Hmm.
And I pitched this book to Dan Flores as well. He seemed pretty interested in it. It's called The Future Wild, and it's kind of like 100-year vision for what wilderness and nature could look like a really kind of bold, break a few eggs, don't hedge, anything like that. But let's come up with like a almost an eco utopian vision, something that's possible. Um, so, for instance, one chapter could be on rewilding our lawns or green infrastructure, or talking about some of the things you talked about in your book, such as like having radio collars around livestock so you don't need barbed wire fences anymore and stuff like that. Yeah. So, what's your general? I don't know if I'm explaining the book well enough. Like, I kind of imagine something like American Prairie being replicated at a much larger scale. So we just don't have these couple little pockets here of wilderness, but something that's really wild and expansive and inspiring in 100 years.
Well, I like it because, as you can probably tell, having read my book, is I the way my brain works, the lens through which look at certain things is that vision and alignment model that's in the book a couple of times at an organizational level. Is presented again at a personal level. What you're talking about is putting together a vision out far enough to allow enough time for it to manifest, and it's going to have certain components about there's this much wild out there, true, but then surrounding that, where there's commercial enterprises, there's people operating in such a way that they are helping to support the continued existence of that wild. It's not getting chipped away all the time, or it's not downstream or downwind from a bunch of coal-fired smokestacks, which hinders the quality of the wild. You're going to talk about the periphery around that wild too, and people's attitudes, which really comes up in how we do wild sky, getting ranchers to be more wildlife, biodiversity, and nature friendly because they get paid to do so. And they pass on that new ethic, down to future generations. I think that's what's happening. Your vision is going to have some of that. What's happening in the periphery, and you can see that happening in India with tiger reserves and corridors between the reserves. Same with Thailand. There's spots where this is actually already happening. It sounds like you're wanting it to work at scale. So if you go out in space and look at the globe, you can say globally, what's cool about this planet is people tend to do this kind of thing on this planet. They really value nature in this way. So I do like it. I think what is I try to do for the 2050, what is needed is people. Let's just focus on Gen Alpha's too young. The oldest ones are like 14 years old, so may not be interested in this. But Gen Z for sure, who's struggling with the whole climate stuff from mood and attitude standpoint. I think people need to have a sense of understanding what are the conditions that will need to be in place for that to come about to Ken's dream. He's told us the dream, perfect. Putting the vision out there is great. What conditions need to be in place for that? And is there a place for me as a Gen Z person, maybe a young millennial, to get involved to help put those conditions in place? Can I find a vocation that is meaningful and feels important because I'm helping get to that? I'm never going to see the finish line because none of us are going to live to be that old, right? But just to have been a part of carrying the water for a while could be awfully cool. Can I fit in this scheme that Ken just laid out? I think answer to that is what I would say.
Mm,
Give people a chance that I could see how I could rework my skills or my personal experiences and my attitude and my drive, my work ethic. I could jump into this thing. So, just like with 2050, that Ed Wilson talked about, you could be involved in continuing to help with empowering women around the planet because that ends up one knock on effect of that is a lot of women feel like I can develop a satisfying, very meaningful, highly rewarding, and very interesting life and have less kids than I thought I was going to have or no kids at all. And that helps level off global population with humans because came through a very, very good thing that women have been waiting for thousands of years to be treated as equals and to have equal opportunity. That is growing. And one result of that is um, can positively affect our population situation. You could get involved in green energy. Come work in the U.S. We could really use you. Um, there is you can get involved in rewilding. You can get involved in changing agriculture. Just today, I think it was in the Guardian. I can't remember. I was looking at this while we were just before we were trying to deal with it. Yeah, here it is. It is the Guardian. How climate breakdown is putting the world's food in peril in maps and charts. Take a look at that. Today's Guardian, folks. And I mean, you could be a hero by taking us forward into some of the most innovative food systems changes that can help wildlife and nature and biodiversity. And I mentioned Singapore, South Korea, Finland, Denmark, Netherlands. Netherlands is the largest food exporter, second largest food exporter in the entire world out of 196 countries. And you could fit 9 Netherlands inside of Montana. It's tiny, but their productivity and how they do food systems with least destructive approach as compared to many other countries, we can learn from these best practices. We can change ag. It's just deciding how to do it. But if we took on these ways, particularly in the U.S., I mean, we could be champions of forming a new relationship with nature. So I think your book is great. Just make sure young people, particularly young people, can get enthused about an idea of belonging in that world and finding a place to fit.
Let's just keep it simple. So, how replicable is American Prairie?
Well, I've always believed that it's quite replicable, and we get this question quite a bit because there's often, it's interesting to me, often some not doubt, but questioning is was there just an amazing, unique, and unusual set of conditions that allow in this one particular place that allowed you to get started and make this thing happen here? And in that, going further, does that mean it's very unlikely to happen anywhere else because it's so unique, the conditions you were able to enjoy when you started 25 years ago? So I don't want people to think about American Prairie like that, is I'm just speaking for myself. And what I would hope is people think it can definitely be replicated in lots of other places, particularly in the American West. So here's just a little bit of background to why my thinking goes this direction. When we started around the year 2000, the Nature Conservancy in the 90s had come up with a big report that identified 10 priority grassland areas across the northern Great Plains. And each one of them were all really good candidates for large scale prairie restoration. And then that report was later used by the World Wildlife Fund US. And they ultimately chose one of those 10 areas, and this one in northern Montana, as the best place to begin what is now turned into the American Prairie Project. So importantly to remember is those other 9 high priority areas didn't disappear. They're still out there. And many of them remain really good candidates for doing nearly exactly what American Prairie is doing. And if you zoom out beyond just the grasslands and look at the American West as a whole, there are probably roughly right around 400 million acres of public land when you combine national forest and particularly Bureau of Land Management lands, which is over a quarter of a billion acres, I should say. And a lot of those lands are currently, leased out to industry like oil and gas and forest products and the livestock industry, but they are available for a variety of other uses, which is just what we're doing, what AP is doing. So if somebody was to choose to do something similar to AP, you don't need to go as big as American Prairie, which is aiming for about 3.25 million acres, as we talked about earlier. I think meaningful rewilding can be done on maybe 1,000,000 acres, which is roughly the size of Glacier National Park, to
Hmm.
maybe 2,000,000 plus acres. That's about the size of Yellowstone, and that's of combined private and public lands. If you think this that way, I can easily imagine 30 to 40 new large protected areas like American Prairie being created throughout the entire American West.
Wow.
It's kind of ready to go right now. It's just looking at it through that lens. So you think about that in terms of helping to get the US to having saved like 40% of its land and water area of nature by 2040, and how it could help with current overcrowding by humans in our existing national parks. I think, I live about an hour from Yellowstone Park. I know a lot of tricks for scoring a campsite there, and it's still really hard to do. Americans, have that their strong desire to spend time in these special places continues to grow. So, 30 to 40 new places like this could be pretty amazing. And another reason I think the model is replicable today is that um, it's hard to explain this, but I think there's simply far more support now in the world of rewilding than there was 25 years ago when we got going. There are more people around the world who understand rewilding, more examples to learn from, and a much stronger public appetite for nature restoration of this sort than there was when we got going. So, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, this is a much better moment to attempt projects like this than when we first began. Now, some people are probably maybe rolling their eyes or questioning this. I know that rewilding as a topic can feel strangely quiet in the United States. I totally get that. You don't hear a lot about it, especially when you compare it to how much constant energy and attention it draws in parts of Europe and Asia and Africa and everywhere else. But I don't think that's because it isn't happening in the US. I think it's because inspiring environmental stories here are often drowned out by bad and alarming news, which dominates our unique media landscape, focused on the negative. If you're not actively looking for rewilding stories, it's pretty easy to miss them. And I had thought of a couple of examples as you asked me this question. I'm just going to guess many listeners and many Americans have not heard about the new amazing Shumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Just got established off the coast of California in late 2024. It was led by the Shumash indigenous people themselves, which makes it a really interesting story. And it protects about 4,500 square miles of ocean right along the coast of Central California. It's one of the largest marine sanctuaries in the country. Most people have not even heard of it. Another recent example I think is pretty powerful is the Klamath River Dam Removal Project, to date the largest dam removal project for nature restoration in the world. That just opened more than 420 miles of river, starting in the Pacific Ocean all the way through Northern California and up into Southern Oregon. It involved a ton of partners and a lot of years of collaborative planning, but it was led by 6 native tribes who have lived in that region for thousands of years. And like the other one I just mentioned, they led this project. And the early signs of recovery, they just got the dams down for a free flowing river, especially for salmon. All the way up that 420 miles of river, the recovery is happening way faster than anybody expected. So if you take a look online at these kind of stories, like just these two successes, you can't help become more open-minded about the possibility of bold, large scale rewilding in the lower 48. I track a lot of these kind of projects around the world. And what happens when you start looking at the two I just mentioned, or more that are happening in America beyond American Prairie, you start to your perception changes, and landscapes you might have written off as too used up or too late to save all of a sudden begin to look full of possibility because
Mm,
you've developed a new lens through which to look at compromised nature areas, and that lens help you see exciting possibilities and opportunities to start innovative new rewilding enterprises. You know, way back. So back to your question, to end up, way back when we first started, our long-term goal was to eventually get the thing done for the public, do what we said we were going to do. But for me, Ken, secondarily, it was also important to show that it can still be done in this day and age, that the era of protecting large areas for nature is not over. And instead, we ought to look at American Prairie as part, like a, kind of an exciting beginning of a rewilding renaissance, if you will. So I hope people don't see it as a one-off thing or a rare occurrence. I hope they see it as a demonstration site, like it's proof that large-scale rewilding can happen again and again all across the American West in lots of different ecosystems. if we're willing to first learn what once existed there, like I had to do, and then imagine what could be returned in places we care deeply about, and then act, get organized, and commit to making it happen.
So if there's a few Sean Garrity's of the future listening right now, um, and they wanted to build one of these, 20, 30, 40, 50 kind of American prairie somewhere in the United States of the future, what are kind of the non-negotiable ingredients? Like, does the land price need to be low? Cultural openness, scale, political alignment, ecological intactness? What are like a few non-negotiables do you think for something like this to work in somewhere else?
Well, the first thing I go to, I've seen a lot of things trying to be started in other areas. People will find me on LinkedIn and want advice. What would you advise as I am trying to get started on something? And unfortunately, I see a lot of good efforts stumbling or taking far longer than they should and chewing up the founder's energy to the point that they'll quit
Yeah.
and go do something easier because a lot of things are easier than rewilding. I can tell you. One non-negotiable is you have to start off from day one realizing you're going to have to build a really great organization.
Mm,
Now that could be 7 people, it could be 14. Uh, by the time I left American Prairie in my particular role after 18 years, it was I think we had like 35 people. Now there's about 50 people there. But it gets busy and it gets complex, and you need to understand how to build a high quality organization that will last. And you have to put it together in such a way that it's probably going to have to last beyond your working lifetime. Because rewilding, if you do it with quality, takes time. You think in decades, not years. So get ready. If you're not experienced on how to build an organization from scratch and something that will last, get a few people who know how to do it and bring them in. Those are some of your most important people right behind the fundraisers because it gets expensive very quickly. But, I think thinking about your organization and what does it need to look like, and what is the culture of that organization to attract the right kind of people who will stay there for a long time and repel others who don't wanna work at this level or whatever. You have to know what kind of organization you want, so it continually refreshes itself, and that has happened in American Prairie. It's stronger than it ever has been, and I haven't been leading it for the last 6 years now, I think it is. 5, 6, 7 maybe. So, an organization that can continuously learn and continuously get better and stronger, because the task at hand, rewilding, will demand that the organization lasts and doesn't falter, doesn't stumble, or go out of business. So that's a big one. I think, just the fact that whatever it is you're interested in actually used to be there. You have to dig back in history and were there buffalo? Were there grizzlies? Were there wolves? How many? Just a sketchy few that passed through at certain times of the year? Or was this a robust, dynamic ecosystem? Is there something to recreate? Trying to make something happen in an area where it never was, I wouldn't recommend that. Um, I wouldn't worry at all about the politics. That can be handled if you're smart about how you do it and take the long view.
mhm.
I wouldn't worry at all about the expense of land if you're going to go the route of buying land, uh, the really strong projects I see around the world, people are acquiring land, not just trying to do it with conservation easements, because at scale, that gets to be very difficult to
Yeah.
hold your vision. If you only need 6 or 7 properties, that's fine, but if you need a lot of land, that's a tricky way to go. The scale thing starts to get, mm, extremely difficult if you don't control the land in some one way or another, or a significant part of it, I should say. And don't worry about the money. Oh my gosh, the money is absolutely out there. Focus on it. Don't worry about it. Don't let it stop you in you thinking about jumping in and getting something started,
Wow. I
because the
wasn't
money
expecting you to say that.
the money absolutely is there. The trick is putting together your vision in such a way that other people will of means who can give you money look at it and say, if I get involved in this project, it's going to enrich my life. This is
Yeah.
so interesting and so exciting. And the promise of it is so rewarding and satisfying to even contemplate. You have to present your thing that way. It has to be real. It can't be smoke and mirrors. It has to be absolutely real so that enough people over time will more and more will join you in trying to make this thing happen. So that's your job, is to make the vision enticing and solid and rich and interesting and like something that's going to be valued generations from now, long after you're not here on the earth anymore. You have to put it forward like that. Then the money still will be hard to get it because it's never a lack of competition because there are lots of fantastic causes out there that deserve this money, but the money is there. It is on the table. You got to get yourself ready. And yeah, part of your organization has to be terrifically skilled and great energy, high integrity people, your fundraisers, and they got to be out there all the time in the game. You can't do it part time, that's for sure. Not that the kind of thing we're talking about, not the scale of big, good quality rewilding.
Yeah. So let's say someone's listening and they're like, "Oh, I got this place in the desert Southwest. There's a lot of public land, just got to buy a couple properties, whatever." What's like the one mistake that they shouldn't make that maybe you made?
I think I talked about this numerous times in the book because I was kicking myself. I made the mistake of thinking not that the fundraising would take care of itself, but wouldn't have to be involved so much because it's not why I never fundraised in my life. So first and foremost, I wasn't good at it because I'd never done it. It's like playing the cello. I just never done it, and it's a long road to getting good at the cello. It's a long road to getting good at fundraising, I can tell you. Um, is realizing it has to be a big part of things. You can't do it part time. You just can't. You can't bifurcate like that and think I'll do it on Thursdays and Fridays, and the rest of the week I'll work on the programs, the on the ground stuff, the wildlife and all that. It doesn't work like that. In my experience, maybe some other people have figured out how to do that, but it's constant running beneath the surface, this demand for being creative, ever more innovative in how you bring that. So that's probably the biggest mistake, is thinking people just say, "Why wouldn't the money just come pouring in? This is such a great idea, and I'm such a great person. You put that combination together. How come people aren't sending me money yet? Go check the mailbox. There's no money." Yeah, so that's important. Really, really key. And then the public relations are more important than you might think. Um, Now, and this last thing I'll say is not dissing scientists at all. But you don't need 90% scientists in your organization,
Mhm.
conservation biologists. You need people who understand project management and they are relentless about getting things done and focusing on things that they would rather not do, like having to go to present to some legislatures or take care of concerns or whatever it might be. Things that you did, they aren't things that attracted you to this project in the first place, but they need to get done.
Yeah.
So you need a lot of people in the organization who will get up every morning and do the tough things first, not wait till the end of the week. Go after the things that are really difficult first, and then go into things that are easier. Um, it's not nearly as much about the science and the biology as people might think.
Gotcha. Um, so something like American Prairie, it's kind of a far away wilderness for most Americans. Maybe they'll take that one trip out there that one time in their life from,
Mhm.
from North Carolina, whatever. Maybe David Attenborough will do a wonderful documentary there or something like that. But that'll be like most people's exposure. It's a far away wilderness for
Mhm.
most of us, and coming from Western New York, which is, Rust Belt and cookie cutter suburbia, it's just like, I want some of this in my back door. I don't want to have to get on a flight and fly 3,000 miles across the country. So I'm just kind of wondering if this can be replicable elsewhere outside of kind of the West, where you have this really weird uh, collection of land ownership. If someone took a close look at the map of American Prairie, and they're coming from the state of New York, they're like, "What the hell is this?" There's state of Montana land here. There's a Native American land. There's Bureau of Land Management. There's National Monument. There's Fish and Wildlife. There's rancher land. There's American Prairie. They're like, "What the hell is this?" So I guess my question is like, American Prairie is working with this unusual model of a whole bunch of Bureau of Land Management land around, and you have this Taylor Grazing Act from 1934 or something, which allows you to lease those lands that you buy. Can this exist where none of that exists? Like, let's look at like an Iowa or a Kansas or a North Dakota where there is very little public land. Could the American prairie model work in another state like that?
I think it absolutely can, and the best models to try to I always encourage organization. I know Ali Fox, who runs the organization, and her team do the same thing, is look all around the world for solutions to what's going on with us, what we're trying to do, and bring those solutions home so we don't have to think about them from scratch, right? In originality is overrated, we used to say, in this business anyway, this rewilding business. Go look for other people who are ahead of us and are doing the kind of things we would love to be able to claim we're doing and bring those ideas home. All right. So that's one thing, is look around the world where this is happening. I would go straight to India, Western Thailand, many places in Asia for sure, some places in Africa where they are working on small building blocks, and then they're working on the corridors between those building blocks. So if you're in the Northeast, and I spent a good bit of time in New Hampshire, I'm going to Maine in just a couple of weeks. uh, my grandparents are from upstate New York and Ithaca. I know that country a bit. There's some very cool things that could be done if you think in terms of very small building blocks of ecology and the corridors between them, for links, for all kinds of critters that fill out the entire ecosystem. The American Southwest does have some rewilding activity, some really cool stuff going on. If you just Google that, or whatever browser you use, what's happening in the Southwest, and you'll be really surprised what's underway there. So I think look to areas where it doesn't have to be this grandiose. We're out in the big American West where things are quite large. You need a lot of land because it's arid.
Mhm.
The aridity here demands that you go big to have full scale ecosystems. But the Everglades is pretty important, and it's awfully small compared to American Prairie, right? And you can do other things that can actually be really brilliant in putting together the building blocks of ecology. Look at the Rewilding Institute website, Rewilding Institute for a Wilder World. And they're really big on this kind of thinking. I really admire them and other organizations for this. Is if we work on these small blocks of ecology and we start to map out others around us, and then we start to think in really innovative ways to get volunteers to help us put together actual corridors between them. And that can mean taking down some fences and maybe 4 or 5 not that expensive overpasses or underpasses under a road. And all of a sudden, we have done a huge thing for ecology by connecting these two places. Ben Goldfarb has a new book out called Crossings, and how unbelievably important just a simple underpass is to allow, if you make it big enough, it's just a steel pipe, corrugated pipe you put underneath the road and put some camera traps in there. All of a sudden, you're seeing foxes and cougars and porcupines and all kinds of stuff that would you normally get killed or smashed on that road above, and have been for a long time. All of a sudden, they're flowing back and forth like
Mm.
water between these two places. And we have done such a disservice not thinking about this, because we didn't really know how ecology worked when we put in our road systems and our fencing systems and our dams. There's a lot of ways to just like you remodel a house, remodeling America for flow between protected areas, and the protected areas don't have to be that big. But just read Ben Goldfarb's book on crossings. He's done a great service to, like, for instance, the Montana Department of Transportation. All of a sudden, things are being to be thought about that are apolitical. I mean, they're bipartisan attempts to make these roadways better for animals to flow back and forth. It's not going gangbusters yet. They have to fight in the budgets and all that kind of stuff. It's barely getting going where it should be, but you can look around the world and see where things like this are going. Here's a big example. I don't know if some people heard about this. It's called the it's Wallace Annenberg. Mm, okay, it's in LA. It's about $240 million. It's an overpass that's going to cross something like 14 lanes of traffic. Can't remember the highway. Californians are probably saying, "I can't believe he doesn't know what this highway is."
Mm.
But Uh, Mostly it was done through all private philanthropy, and they built this overpass for mountain lions. That's it. Now, lots of stuff is going to use this overpass because it's brilliantly done. But that's just how important crossing these roadways is becoming. It is just getting going. Read that book and then go out with a new lens, having read crossings, and you'll see if you live in Vermont, if you live in Maine, if you live, 70 miles outside of Buffalo, New York, you'll be able to see areas where you can feel like we can do something really important, a single initiative, like an intelligent crossing that has multiple positive benefits to nature. So that's my long answer to that. There's so much opportunity if you shape a new lens and look at things through this new lens, this new education of yourself.
It just makes me think of just how much foresight we were lacking, in the past couple hundred years. Like I think about, manifest destiny and moving west and all that. And like in an ideal world, there's a national park kind of where American Prairie is. Someone decided, 100 years ago or so, there needs to be kind of like a grasslands national park. We should be thinking about corridors. We should be thinking about all this stuff. But now, someone like you has to come in and kind of do what the government should have done hundreds of years ago. And of course, the Native Americans should have been treated way better. I've been a park ranger up in Alaska. I think we've learned quite a bit uh, since the 19th century. But so I guess what I'm getting at is like I'm a I feel like the government ought to be kind of running this stuff. So is there any worry of kind of like a rewilding elite, or this model where it really relies heavily on like private philanthropy and land acquisition?
Well, there's a lot in there. I think, as far as looking
Too much in
backward.
there. Sorry about that.
No, that's two things. I'm gonna I'll focus on two of those things. It's very interesting to me what you're bringing up. Is one is, we should have done it differently a long time ago. Like, I agree with that, but this happens all the time. It was 1836, the first time this was mentioned that we ought to do something on the grasslands. It was artist George Catlin. He'd been out numerous times painting a lot, went back to Congress and said, we ought to make a nation's park before it's all gone. Because he could see the fur trappers from Hudson Bay Company coming out for 20 or 30 years and devastating the beaver population, which begins to knock. They're a keystone species, begins to destroy the ecology well before the bison were all killed by the government. So in 1836, someone said we ought to have an American prairie out there. Didn't go very far. Congress wasn't very interested. There was no Yellowstone. Didn't happen 50 more years. So there's always people that see things early on, but it has to repeatedly be put in front of you. I'm sitting in my house here in Montana. I knew about electric cars in the mid 1990s. Nothing intrigued me about electric cars for a long time. And then when it started to look interesting, in the late 2010 or 2014 or 2015, that it looks interesting, but it's too expensive to sell my car that's all paid off and buy an electric car. They're really pretty pricey. Well, today I'm sitting here and I just watched my wife drive off in our electric Hyundai Ioniq 5. That is the car we use 90% of the time. It's all electric. We have a very large solar system on top of our house that charges that car most of the time with the sun. It's so cool, such a blast to drive, incredibly powerful and screaming fast. I can't ever see buying another gasoline powered car. But it took me 30 years to slowly get into the whole electric car thing.
Hmm.
And I am a pretty forward-looking person as much as anybody else, but it just didn't make sense for a whole long time. But now, as I, go to when she comes back, or maybe she already did, I don't know. You plug it in, little gas pump in our garage, and it's sucking sun into the car. You realize how cool is that, and how capable this car is. She's driven it to Calgary. It's been, Spokane, Washington, goes all over the place. But it took me a while. So people take a while to learn what kind of things we should eat, how we should raise our kids. Things were different, and you get more and more information. Let's go back to the government, though. I think governments go through interesting phases, waxing and waning on courage to move forward on certain things or interest to forward on certain things. And one of the hardest things I think is when you're still making money doing it the old way, the new way is not that attractive. You have to let go of that old way where you're still making money and take on something that is better, for instance,
Yeah.
environmental, whatever. And it's really hard to let go of that if you can still squeeze some money out of, you know, making electricity out of coal, for instance. Doesn't matter how much reasoning people throw at you. I'm still making money. It's going to cost me to do it a different way, right? So I think your government is almost always going to lag behind information that tells you there's a better way to do it. So to me, then citizens, um, that's a cool thing, at least about America. In America, you can act yourself. We didn't ask anybody when we started American Prairie Reserve. We just did it because we didn't think we weren't going to hold our breath waiting for the Park Service to say, now that we read this, there should be a national park there. Let's do it. That wasn't going to happen. Um, or my wife and I didn't wait for huge incentives in Montana to buy an electric car, or do there was some for solar, but waiting for that, holding your breath for great incentives to move towards green energy here, you can be waiting a very long time in the state that I live in, but you can take action by yourself, like I just did, and our neighbors did the same thing, and then we're not trying to one up each other, but I realize our neighbor who lives next door, say the solar panels go up and then they got batteries and go, well, we don't have batteries in our garage. We should think about batteries, So that's how it happens, person to person, neighbor to neighbor. You can't wait for government to do the right thing. Sometimes they burst forth and do that. You can see that all around the world. But more often, they're waiting and seeing, and they don't put enough money into, enough attention into moving something along. So act yourself, and then later the government will catch up. So at a micro level, my little electric car. At a macro level, American Prairie Reserve.
And um the rewilding elite, like, I'm happy what American Prairie is doing. Like, you've opened up access where there previously wasn't. The hunting community is probably very appreciative of some new hunting opportunities. The rest of the country is just going to love the idea of bison roaming together and another intact wilderness. But, if we're looking 200 years ahead of the time, and let's imagine, 50 other American prairies popping up across the American West, I guess I would just be worried that, they would have a ton of control, and all the kind of the vision would be very kind of top down rather than down up. Do you kind of see where I'm going with that? Like, uh,
I think you do need to be suspicious of private enterprise. Yes. First and foremost, you can lock out regular people, just middle class people, from enjoying what it is that's being created. There's a lot of places not far from looking out my window, I can see about 60 miles. And there are places between me and the horizon where private individuals have, yes, saved a view shed, yes, saved something from development. But if I was to drive out there 30 miles into the mid ground that I'm looking at to that place, the first thing I see is fences and keep out signs. So the view shed is there. There's some wildlife benefit. There's lack of a subdivision having been built, but the public is completely locked out. So yeah, you do have to. That can and does happen most of the time, actually, with private efforts to do certain things. Um, the nice thing about involving a lot of public land, which is the model I promoted about those 30 to 40 places across the American West, when you do it like American Prairie, 75 to 80% of your model is public land. That
yeah.
means the public is protected. We can do all this. We can try to bring back historic wildlife abundance, all these kind of things. Have the field schools where the kids from surrounding towns come out all the time, working with ranchers with our Wild Sky program, all of that. But the public does not have to fear fences and keep out signs with something that has such a heavy component of public land in it. That's why public lands are really, really important. It's a hedge. It protects you against individuals who think what they're doing is good for America as long as we keep all the people out, kind of thing. So it's hard to explain that, but I think when you look at a new example of something like American Prairie, it's going to be in southern Utah, or it's going to be in Nevada, where there's tons of BLM land. New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, wherever, all the places I'm talking about, take a look at the percentage of public land of their model. If there's quite a high percentage, you can feel safe that you're not going to be a loser in this equation,
Yeah.
whatever they're going to do. You're going to be able to go there just like you did with the American Prairie, right? And you don't have to ask, and there's no gate fee.
I think the question sort of comes from where I live in Scotland and watching the rewilding movement there. And that's largely dependent on sometimes, foreign outsiders buying up these huge estates and then
Mhm.
rewilding them. And I'm like looking at it from afar. I'm like, yes, thank you for doing that. That needed to happen for hundreds of years. But then you always get this kind of queasy feeling like, oh, this is just like one guy from Denmark figuring this, like, is this vision going to die with him? Whereas you kind of think of uh, like a community up, like the Taurus Valley people who you had on your podcast, like you could sense that that could be resilient because it could kind of evolve with the community over decades and centuries. So I guess
That's
that's
a Scotland's an excellent example. I was booked to do a talk at a university, Stirling University in Scotland, a while ago. So my wife and I went early, and we walked along something called the West Highland Way. Is we spent, I don't know, 10, 11 days on this 100-mile, very casual, beautiful walk from little town to little town villages. It was astounding because we were also reading books, history books on Scotland on our Kindles along the way in the evenings as we were resting our feet from walking. And it was surprising as an American to see how much private land is, or I should say, the lack of public land, and that you're locked out from these hunting concessions, basically. And a lot of the concessions then were in order to optimize for hunting, they had to sub-optimize the rest of the ecology. Like you don't want predators out there on your bird hunting reserve, or even your deer. You don't want wolves or any kind of the kind of predators on your deer hunting preserve or whatever. Um, yeah, that is really interesting. And you're right. When it's owned by a private landowner, they can put a conservation easement on it to not build, to maintain the wildlife and the ecology there. But when you get their kids or their grandkids running the place, it may not be quite as welcoming as it was when that person from wherever came from. So I think Taurus Valley, I encourage all your listeners to go look at that website. That is a beautiful example of how, in a culture where most things are private land, there's not a lot of public land, that you can do it in such a way that the public absolutely benefits. And when the really clever and creative people who are running it right now, you'll see them on the website or listening to my podcast. When they're gone, one day they will be, the mission continues on, and that is that the public is allowed to enjoy it in an area like Scotland, where private land is usually, in like the UK in general, Ireland, etc., is the thing. Taurus Valley is a fantastic example of what I'm talking about, a positive example in my mind.
half of Scotland is owned by 432 individuals, families, or corporations, which is just amazing. Um,
You know,
But, looking at, like, the future of American prairie, like, let's take, like, the 100-year view into the future. Like, earlier, I laid out just all the kind of entities around there, like, the State of Montana Land, Bureau of Land Management, private land, Fish and Wildlife Service, American Prairie Land, Native American land. I'm probably forgetting, like, 4 other kinds of land around there. I'm wondering if like if if you're willing to speculate about like will American Prairie need like a different kind of organizing and governing body to kind of bring in everybody into this in the future? Like can you see American Prairie as a governing body evolving in some way?
absolutely evolving, particularly when you take the 100-year view, which I like. So first and foremost, we're having this conversation 100 years from now, assuming the U.S. is still a sovereign nation. Let's go with
Yep.
that first.
Yep.
And it looks kind of like it does now. And not a lot of nations do in terms of their standing in the world and all that kind of thing. 100 years is a long time, and we'll be well over 300 years old at that time. We're still an experiment. And as you can tell from these times we're in, the experiment keeps unfolding and keeps testing the original framers' assumptions about how things would go, our systems of checks and balances between our three branches of government, all that kind of stuff. We're constantly being tested as a country as to what our core values are, what our mission is as a country, or what it is we're trying to be. Ideally, what our relationship to nature is as a country is a really big one right now, quite up for debate. So, without me having any idea, you have to live with uncertainty about all of that and not assume steadiness or like nothing's going to change. That would be silly. Um, I'm going to guess that American Prairie will look similar to how it does now. And here's what I mean by that is for it to work well, there's a core area that we promised to create a long, long time ago, about 3.25 million acres. And that is one place in 180 million acres of the northern Great Plains, one relatively small place where wildlife comes first, not human enterprise of making money in the capitalist system, putting the money in your pockets. This is about what you can do that on the rest of the 180 million acres. But in this particular place, carve out a place, one place before it's all gone, before it all gets plowed up, where wildlife comes first. So there's that small core. Bigger than that, though, is an ecosystem like the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It's millions of acres bigger than the core, which is the anchor um, wildlife area. And within that ecosystem, I predict, just because I look at long term trends around the world, not so great in the United States. We're behind, way behind a lot of the rest of the world, but we tend to catch up, usually last minute. I might get in trouble for this joke, but a lot of people Winston Churchill is known to have said, uh, I just love the Americans. You can always count on them to do the right thing once they have exhausted every other
Mm.
possibility. And I think that's kind of where we are with our relationship to nature right now. But as we look around the rest of the world and see how it's being done in Australia and Africa, many parts of Asia, we will catch up. Yeah, we did our national parks, and that was a really great idea, to Ken Burns' point. But that tapered off dramatically in the 1950s, and the robust, huge era of making lots and lots of big parks, tapered off. And we haven't done anything really spectacular since. But I think it will come back. Things wax and wane. Um, but I think what we'll have down the road in 100 years, my guess will be, and I'm open to certainly being wrong. I won't be here to be told that I'm wrong. Obviously, don't have that much time left, given my age. But I think there will be probably 4 or 5 entities at the table trying to keep that core area as healthy and as high quality as possible, where the wildlife comes first, and trying to make sure there's a really high quality interaction between the core area and the surrounding ecosystem, that millions of acre ecosystem on the northern Great Plains. So you'll have tribal at the table having a big voice. You'll have some sort of regulatory agency. Right now, it's called Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I don't know what that'll be in 100 years. You'll probably have that's a state, saying you'll have some kind of federal voice. Right now, it's 2 departments of the Interior. That's the Bureau of Land Management and the Fish and Wildlife Service at that table. You'll have American Prairie, because if we're still a private land ownership, private property right type of country in 100 years, who knows? American Prairie will be there because it holds in its hand fee title to a lot of land that's all paid for. They're not mortgaged to the hilt like it is right now. And they'll be there because they own a great amount of the glue that pulls a lot of this core area together. And yeah, you'll have at least those entities at the table. So that means, the best groups in sociology, they say the ideal group is 7 plus or minus 2. So at
Mm.
that table, I just named about 7 people, maybe 6 people. That's excellent. You don't have to have a United Nations thing to run this thing. It's
Yeah.
not that complicated. You can have 6 or 7 people at the table. They can meet twice a month and say, how do we make this thing continuously better all the time? As long as they have an attitude of continuous improvement as opposed to competition amongst themselves, that's where things begin to unravel. But if you have it, come to the table those entities I just mentioned, meet once a month for 3 hours and say, where are we right now? What's current reality right now? What's working? What's not working so well? How do we make it 5% better this year? And next year, we make it 5% better again. Smoothness, how it operates, the fairness to the greatest number of people and how it operates. As long as they take that attitude in their management task as a collaborative, um, I think it'll be spectacular. Will that happen? I have no idea.
If
People are
there's any
people.
if there's any like futuristic podcast archivists listening to this podcast, thank you for listening. I hope our predictions don't sound too
Yeah,
silly. I know I like the idea of this kind of committee.
yeah.
That kind of makes a lot of sense to me. And while we're talking about the deep future, before I let you go, I need to get maybe not American Prairie's perspective, but maybe Sean Gerrity's perspective on de-extinction, because I don't think American Prairie wants to tell the local ranchers the saber-toothed tiger or dire wolf is going to be reintroduced tomorrow. But how do you generally think about it from a general standpoint?
Well, uh, I don't even know if you know this, but I'm on the conservation advisory board of of a big, not a big, but fast moving organization called Colossal,
Oh, of
and
course I
they're
know
one.
Colossal. Yeah, yeah. Dan
Yeah,
Flores and I talked about Colossal.
yeah. So I'm both Dan and I and Mike Phillips of Turner Endangered Species Fund, Jason Baldez, tribal leader from Wyoming. A lot of people I know are on this, and they're asking. The idea is, when they said, "Will you serve on this with Dan Flores and others?" Well, what do you want from me? I'm not a scientist, kind of thing. And their chairman of their board, came up with the idea of CRISPR, and these are some stratospherically smart people running this thing. What are you looking for in terms of added value? Is they want advice on how should we think about rewilding? How should we think about humankind's relationship to nature? We want to be your guys' voices here. So I thought about Phillips and I think about Flores and I think about Baldes and all these other people. They asked me to be a part of that group. I said, I can do that because I can warn you away from, doing some things that to me, don't make a whole lot of sense just because you can technologically do it. Um, but they are doing, if you look at their report, they have a 2025 wrap up report that just came into my mailbox. They sent me a couple days ago. I haven't read it all the way through, but you see mostly what they're doing is not trying to bring back the great auk or Carolina parakeet or passenger pigeon or all these things we slaughtered into oblivion and don't exist anymore because of us. They're working on things that are still here, but are greatly barely hanging on by their fingernails. Like Mike Phillips
Mhm.
is working on the southern desert tortoise, which they're trying to, there's a race in time to figure out the genetics of that particular tortoise. So that's a big thing that Mike Phillips, a project. That's a colossal project. They invited me to help, and my wife, who was very excited about this, because when we're visiting our grandkids in southern Texas, to be a part of helping to go capture red wolves, of which there's very few pure red wolves left in the United States, very few. So capturing those genetic markers are really, really important to look at red wolf populations, for instance, in North Carolina that don't have those genetics that are in southern Texas. So how do we isolate those? And you do the same thing in the bison world. So it's really, really important to make sure you have the right kinds of alleles to create robust, strong diversity to hedge against diseases and things like that can wipe out your entire population of a certain species. So they're doing a lot of work like that, which I'm glad they are. People will focus on, well, hey, they're trying to bring back mammoths too. That's not their main thing. So take a look at the bigger picture of de-extinction. Mostly what they're working on is things that are about to go extinct because of us, and trying to figure out how can we save that. And they want to know us. They're looking at it from a genetic standpoint and a science standpoint to not things blink out, like trying to bring back the beautiful huge Carolina parakeet, which is a phenomenal animal, and we blew it away. It's gone because
Mhm.
of us. They're trying to prevent more of that. It's a big value of theirs, things that are still alive in the oceans and on the terrestrial areas of the world. I think it's
Amazing. I
important
Yeah,
because
I didn't realize
we're
they were doing so much work with, existing but, very much in threatened animals. That said, I really would like to see a mammoth before I die. And yeah, that's for the
well, it's
podcast archivist. I'm one of the goodies. It's our moral obligation to bring back some of these poor
and I think
animals.
we have to realize human beings are still out there on a rampage wrecking stuff from a nature standpoint. We have not taken our foot off the gas of that. It is still going on today. So I admire people like Colossal to take you look who's on their science advisory on their science team and what they're trying to work on, and someone's got to work against what humans are doing to the planet. Someone has to figure out how do you deal with this and save things before we just wreck even more stuff, which we are very much on track to do still.
Will
Yeah.
these will these future places, I mean, do they have to be kind of nonprofit run refuges, or do you think there's a possibility that, the United States government could piece together this stuff and form new national parks?
At the moment, that's a really good question, and I think I get discouraged when people just sweep these kind of questions off the table and say, "We're never gonna build national parks like we used to," like Ken Burns' thing, the, National Parks, America's greatest idea ever, or whatever it's called, best idea, something like that. And it lasted for an era, and then from around 1870 with Yellowstone, and tapered off in 1950 or so, and we still make some parks, but they're usually quite small and not ecosystem scale. The big era was between 1870 and 1950. And a lot of people just think the window is closed on that. Too much contention, too many people, too many interests, the industry interests that will fight against you for that can't happen anymore. You'll just get shouted down in the US. At the moment, possibly, but in 15 years, maybe it opens again. Things fluctuate, things change. Think about the Dark Ages and then the Renaissance in Europe. Nobody in the middle of the Dark Ages thought there would be a Renaissance, right? So you got to stay open to the possibility we could get after it again and actually start making national parks through the Interior Department with some progressive, open-minded executive and group of people in our U.S. Congress and amenable people in the Supreme Court. Our three branches of government are supposed to have all these checks and balances and stuff. It could occur. The framework is there and the history is there, and people really appreciate it. Our parks are jammed now because the demand to be in them is so high. So there's pent up desire building up behind the dam. Maybe the dam will break. I don't know. I'm not holding my breath for that. Meanwhile, private parties like us can go ahead and do it anyway and build the biggest one that's ever been done. So that's kind of cool too. Think about that 400 million acres of public land out there. Find a spot that rings your bell, lights you up, and start forming a team and doing it. And you can copy us. We broke a lot of ground. You don't have to do it exactly like us. And you can shake up all kinds of models that are going to be under mm, constant morphing anyway, like the North American model for wildlife that people seem so proud of, which actually is kind of a bit of an anachronism right now. It's not working very well, but that can change too. And we can learn a lot from how people do things in Africa and other places in terms of how you manage wildlife. So I think it's absolutely possible. And I think while we're waiting for the government to come back around and have a renaissance, nature, wildlife, scenery renaissance, and consider starting to make more new parks again, that would be a great thing to do. I think Americans, Republicans and Democrats would cheer about that if we had courageous enough politicians to suggest it. Meanwhile, do it ourselves. And we just proved it can be done.
You have a long view, and it sounds like it's historically informed, and um, that's kind of what I used when I was doing my Right to Roam book. Because everybody who I talked to about was like, "There's no way this is the land of guns and no trespassing," and I'm like, "Now it is. You have no idea what it's going to be like in 50 years or 100 years. I mean, I'm 42 years old. There's a lot that's changed
Oh,
within
yeah.
my lifetime. And there's a lot
Hmm.
that can change over the next 42 years or the next 200 years. I mean, it depends on how long you're looking out to the future.
Hmm. Yeah, you just have to watch trends and take advantage of the trends. And just and see where when the conditions finally begin to come about that give you a fair shot at having a success to whatever dreams you formulated. And that's exactly what we did. Do we is there enough room here to give it a shot in 2000, 2001? And do we believe things will get easier over time? And they have. So we made a bet. And the idea of rewilding has grown. Technology has grown to help, like being able to remove fence and use virtual fence. That is coming on. All kinds of things actually tipped in our favor over a quarter century to make it easier and easier. It is, we do not have the wind at our back. It is not easy. Um, the people at American Prairie now are working really hard, solving problems all the time, having constant experiencing setbacks, but they will succeed. Things are moving in the right direction in the rewilding space.
So, speaking of years, and you write about this in your book, you always need these benchmarks, kind of thinking ahead of time. What are things going to look like in 6 months, a year, 18 months? I'm curious what you want to see happen with American Prairie for the rest of your life. By the time it's time for you to kick the bucket, um, what would you like to see? Where would you like to see American Prairie by then?
If what I'd like to see is just um, what's happening now to continue, and that is continuing to make it larger by acquiring more um, of the landscape and habitat. Like a new piece just happened, was it 3 months ago? 60, roughly 64,000 acres. If you convert that to square miles, it's about 106 square miles added. It's a 48th acquisition. For that to keep on going, as opportunities to take it slowly, pace it at the point where people actually want to sell, because you can't hurry that. They have all the power. They hold all the power. They decide when they want to sell. And you just have to be there and ready to go. So continuing on with that, that is a very good course that's on. Continuing on, trying to learn from other projects in order to bring back innovations that make American Prairie better. There's a thing called Wild Sky that helps ranchers live with wildlife abundance in the periphery of the of the American Prairie area. And we got that idea. We had no idea how to do that. We brought back an idea from Namibia, the Waterberg Plateau with Lori Marker, about how to pay ranchers to be more biodiversity friendly, and she was proving it would work. And then we also, the most successful program within Wild Sky is called Cameras for Conservation. We took that idea wholesale from the Northern Jaguar Project in Mexico. They were taking pictures, and they're paying every time you see her get a picture of a jaguar live on your ranch, you get paid cash money for that live jaguar photograph. And a month later, the jaguar comes back and walks in front of that camera. You get paid again. We do that. We got those ideas from somebody else. So I like continuously gathering ideas from other places rather than trying to revamp the wheel. I always would tell people when I was CEO, originality in my mind is overrated. Overrated. We're about execution. We're about
Mm.
innovation. That's taking somebody else's idea and putting it into effective practice. The world is littered with great ideas, people who are ahead of us. Let's take their ideas and apply it here. It'll move us quicker. And innovation is fun. We don't have to be always the originator of the ideas. It takes too long. So I think they continue to do that. They fly all over the world. They go to Romania. They go to down to Chile. They go all over the place looking for how other people are doing things and seeing what can be brought back. That's super smart. It's just you sometimes you have to show up. You actually physically move about. You can't just do it by reading articles all the time or just going to conferences. You have to go see these people working. And I think I'd like to see the continuation of donors saying, every time you give money to American Prairie, they do what they say they're going to do. I go out next year and ask, what did you do with my money? And I come away very impressed, sometimes
Mm.
blown away with what they did. That's not easy to do. I'd say maintain that track record. A big piece right now is, I think, though, how long did you say? How long do I have on this? 15 years? Not just finish the answer, but you said 15 years out or whatever that is. What I'd like to see is a big breakthrough in helping people to better understand the original baseline. And Dan Flores, I talk about this quite a bit. I was talking to him earlier this week. Um, is getting people to remember the original baseline of what used to be there, so that's more common. And through our American Prairie Field School, kids are being brought up in this region understanding what was there in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s when Lewis and Clark came through, the amount of extraordinary abundance that was there to reset the baseline, not what you're seeing today, but what the baseline used to be, this plethora of wildlife. And what that then asks, or you're able to do, is look at, there's 4, 5, 6 million acres of public land out there. And this is interesting because sometimes when we buy a property like that last one, in my experience, the next day hunters call us up and say, "Can we hunt on your property?" And I used to ask when I was in a role, if I was to take those phone calls, "Why don't you want to hunt on the 6 or 7 million acres of public land out there?" They go,
Mm.
because there's little to no wildlife on the public land. So can we hunt on your place? And if you're hunters or anybody in the public, why are we tolerating that? That wildlife has been obliterated and down to less than a fifth, or a 5% or less of what originally was there a very short time ago, is that wildlife abundance begins to be on track towards abundance, I should say, on public lands. And we can do that within any losers in that equation or that in that dream. There's best practices all over the world on how agriculturalists and others can live with sorry about that, can live with terrific wildlife abundance, and we're proving that with our Wild Sky program. People they get paid $500 if a wolf walks up in front of a camera trap on their property, $500 for a grizzly bear, $250 for a lion, and they're responding well to this. Agriculturists will respond and consider a very different in relationship with nature if they are thought about, and you can give them ideas on how to live with it. They get paid for it, and we can do it on the public lands as well. So that would be the dream. Is that's a next step. Is that those 4, 5, 6 million acres of public land out there are on their way to historic abundance once again? That'd be
I
pretty
liked it
cool.
how you had that in your one of your podcasts. Someone talking, it's not sustainability we want; it's thrivability. And I think you're headed in that direction, Sean. One of the question I usually end with guests is just anything you're enjoying in the culture, anything you're listening to or watching or reading that you want to recommend to the listeners.
I think what I these days, those four things I talked about: agriculture and green energy and rewilding and changes in agriculture to make the all four. I really enjoy reading articles that are there if you just know how to look for them, like the Guardian this morning, uh, of good news happening in those four areas. Because when good news occurs, you can feel like we could, 2030, we're going to miss a lot of targets. We got started a little late. There's a lot of debating what's going to count and all this kind of stuff. It's very messy. But thankfully, people are passionate. They're trying. The execution between 2030 and 2040, I think it's going to get better. And between 2040 and 2050, it's going to get better because you can feel it. All the important things are moving forward. 86%, for instance, in green energy, 86% of all new cars sold in 2024 in Norway were fully electric, not
Wow.
hybrids. And in Montana, people go, "Oh, we can't. You have electric cars. It's cold here." It's pretty cold in Norway. There's big distances. Here's big distances here in Montana. Have you driven the length of Norway? Man, and it's dark. And guess what? Over 80% of all new cars sold are electric. How did they do that? We have to have curiosity about that. It's extraordinary. 11 European countries have completely shut down their last coal-fired electrical generation plants. Even England, that was the center of the industrial revolution, and Ireland this August, they were the latest one. They just closed their last coal-fired generation plant. Coal is going away. Some people are clinging to it. I won't mention who. Some are not very far from where I'm sitting, but it's going away. That's good for our kids and our grandkids and for wildlife not to breathe that stuff. And there are different ways to create energy, and we know it. It's just deciding to pursue it. But every time I see something in one of those four areas, it's so exciting. That you know what? I'm not going to be around to see my grandkids when they're in their 20s and 30s. I'll be long gone. But this stuff will be old hat. There no be no coal plants. They're in kindergarten right now. When they get their driver's license, they're not going to drive up fossil fuel cars. No way. And by 1937, they're not going to drive a fossil fuel car. It might be hydrogen. If it's not hydrogen, it'll be fully electric. But gas cars will be gone. So I think you know watching those trends is really nice. I enjoy that a lot.
You're
So
watching these.
curate your own news, and you'll find some pretty optimistic stuff out there.
I kind of want that app. I want that website where someone aggregates all this kind of positive, kind of energy, environmental news. I don't know if that exists. It probably doesn't, but someone
Oh,
someone needs to make it.
one's called Reason. Do you remember the band David Byrne and the Talking Heads?
Of course, yeah.
David Byrne runs a podcast. It runs a newsletter called Reasons to Be Cheerful. Isn't that a great title? That's David Byrne's lead singer for the Talking Heads. So just subscribe. It's free to Reasons to Be Cheerful. And some of the writers in there are fantastic. There's one woman, I can't remember her name. She writes all the time. She digs up this stuff and you go, damn, I didn't know that was happening in Denmark or whatever. And it's on something that's on a roll. It's not just an anomaly, some little experiment they're trying someplace. It's a part of a trend. And that's what's exciting is to see these trends unfold.
Well, Sean Gerrity, a champion of conservation, a titan of rewilding. It's been an absolute honor chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all this time, Ken. Really fun. I appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate that you like the book. And I hope some young folks will find it similarly interesting as they're thinking about how they want to spend the next decades themselves. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Fantastic, Sean. Happy trails.
All right. See ya. Bye.